let's just jump into it. Topic 1. A judge repealed California's 3 decades old ban on assault weapons and ruled it to be unconstitutional. The California AG argued that the weapons were more dangerous and used in a disproportionate amount of mass shootings. The judge disagreed and said that the guns were overwhelmingly used for legal purposes, and law-abiding citizens were being deprived of weapons that are legal in most states. The judge is correct to say most of these weapons aren't used for crime. But if we follow his reasoning, does that mean most firearm regulations are unconstitutional because they will in some way deprive a law-abiding citizen of their legally operated weapons? Isn't it worth restricting this right in the interest of public safety? And credit to our good friend Counterpoints for being so kind as to bring this up. All right, we'll start with Fanatic. 1 minute introduction.
Wow. Okay. Being from California, I mean, I feel like I've never been a big fan of our gun laws. I feel like we go a little bit ham unnecessarily. But overall, I think, I think it's true that the vast majority of these guns aren't used in that purpose. If we were really trying to save lives, it would make more sense for us to do something like ban handguns, which of course no one's in favor of. I think I'm in favor of them removing this restriction, and I think we should probably focus more on things like mental health and things like that in order to deal with a mass shooting problem. Because banning assault weapons is just stupid.
Okay, thanks so much, and thank you, Gilly Theory, for gifting another 200 bits. We have a hype train started. If people could help out the hype train, that'd be awfully kind of you. 4.5 minutes up on the clock, but thank you so much for the donations. Okay, next, Sprout.
So yes, I think that we should have assault rifles, or whatever you're gonna call them, assault weapons. AR does not stand for assault rifle, but we'll go into that different time. It's Armalite rifle. But I think that they should be legalized in all 50 states. I'm 100% for the abolishment of the National Firearms Act. I think the National Firearms Act is an abridgment of the Second Amendment. Because if you actually look at, like Mr. Fanatic said, if you actually look at the crimes that are committed, they are more often committed to handguns than they are with rifles. This is common among all crimes. And so with that being said, I am 100% for what the judge said, and I don't think with that being said, I don't think it's a public interest to ban these weapons for the sake of public safety, considering these weapons aren't used and handguns are used.
Okay. And thank you, Universal Discourse, for being so incredibly kind. Gifting, what was it, 5 hot tier 1 gift subs to the channel? Yes, thank you. And thank you, Canada Dark, for gifting 199 bits, and I think Universal for another 200 bits. That's really, really kind. We're at level 2 hype train. If you could help us out, 4.5 minutes up on the clock, please help out the hype train. Keep this channel sustainable. Thanks so much. Counterpoints.
Yeah, so I think Californians and I believe the state of Hawaii and a few other states are responsible for legislating for the bench. I'm expecting a concealed weapons permit victory on the way, not just the assault weapons ban victory for the gun rights advocates, because there are counties in California and New York that may issue states, and basically they arbitrarily decide who gets to have a concealed weapons permit. So the only people who actually have the right to keep and bear arms in some of these counties are people who are rich or connected. So I see these contestations making it up to the Supreme Court. I see another good ruling coming down. I think there's plenty of things that we can do in order to end mass shootings. I think putting armed security or law enforcement in soft targets is a good idea. 1 per 500, 1 per 1,000. I think mandating these for public, or that kind of standard for public facilities, is a good idea. I think universal health care is a good idea. I think universal mental health care is a good idea. I think taking care of our sick and our mentally ill and our mentally disordered folks is a good way to reduce mass shootings. And I think from a leftist perspective, I would be more interested in solving the material conditions than taking away people's rights. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm happy to get into details in the general. Looking forward to it.
Colorado.
Yeah, so just off of pure emotional reasons, I don't like the appeal of it. But when I went ahead and looked further into it, I saw that the year after this ban went into place, there was actually an increase in the amount of murders that were committed. So I can't really see how this like legislation really did anything necessarily effective. Like likewise, if we want to say that, hey, ARs happen to kill a lot of people, basically every single weapon could go ahead and be attributed to killing people. So statistically, I will have to say that the appealing of this law, I feel like will probably cause like a spike just because suddenly they're available, just like everything does whenever something's appealed. But then it would probably get normalized again. But just through pure emotional reasons, I don't like the appeal. But yeah, I can't really support that, so I have to support the other end.
Okay. Thanks so much. 2 minutes left on the hype train. If anyone else helps out, be awfully appreciative. All right, next, Omni.
I mean, I think that the issue is that we have these sort of vague rules that determine in what cases judges should make judgment calls about which guns people have the right to have. And I think that sort of given the difficulty of determining what guns people should have or not, I think a better solution would be one that was proposed in a law article. I'm forgetting the name of the author. But the solution was setting up a liability scheme where if a gun seller sells a gun to someone and they use it to harm people, then the gun seller can be held financially accountable. So similarly to how with pollution, I think a good solution is to tax the harms caused by it. I think that we should tax the harms caused by people supplying guns to other people. And then then you would expect sellers to take adequate gun safety precautions because they have a financial incentive too. And as the article pointed out, it would not involve infringing upon the Second Amendment because it would just be restricting setting up a liability scheme, which doesn't violate your right to own a gun if we set up a liability scheme for if the gun that you sell to someone is used to harm people.
Thank you. All right, Kobe.
For sure. So I think that gun control is a little bit more of a contentious topic than it needs to be, but I understand why it is, because you have a lot of people like our beta O'Rourke's that throw it out of proportion and make the conversation very difficult. I'm assembling my facts here, but it looks like a vast majority of Americans support, like, I don't like the term common sense, but common sense gun control. Stuff like, laws encouraging safety, talking about taxes and fines. That's what I think laws encouraging, or safety, obviously laws encouraging safety. But yeah, that's a good idea. Laws encouraging safe gun storage. Laws concerning stuff that we've talked about here, not letting people with violent crimes get them, et cetera, et cetera. I think that these are pretty reasonable, and we should try to approach them. I don't know; they seem reasonable. In specifically in California's case, I agree with Fanatic. California has like a legitimately like very like obviously kind of an emotional response, like emotional legislation, in which like we just don't like guns, we don't like big guns, and we pass a lot of really stupid things. Everybody knows about like the famous California AR-15 stocks that like make it harder to shoot and stuff, or make it hard to put a bump stock on or something. I don't know. It seems all very silly. I agree that we need to try to get a little bit more fact based into this. But hey, maybe we should fund federal gun research a little bit more. That'd be pretty based. But as Counterpoint said, we can get into the details in the open.
Shadows.
Okay, so yeah, I am. I think I'm very consistent. I'd like to think so when I call myself a civil libertarian. So I am very pro-gun, and I have a very strong stance on this. I know I'm going to enjoy talking about this with Sprouticus, because there are certain clauses in it. And I think the regulation clause, I think a total ban on just assault weapons is totally an overstep. California totally oversteps it. If we want to talk about banning certain things, I think certain magazines would be a better topic. I think extended magazines, like a 50-round magazine or a drum magazine for ARs, I think that's fine banning. I think California's a little too restrictive on its, magazines when it comes to handguns, but we can get into that, and also, the other more nuanced stuff. But I think generally speaking, you should not just ban, entire class of guns. If California wants to put a little bit of red tape around it, I understand that. But otherwise, I think just outright banning it is totally unconstitutional, and I very much agree with the judge.
Maddie.
Whew, well, we just heard 7 people who are like, yeah, this is totally fine. We should have some more AR-15s and guns. So I am just so excited to see how this goes, because I tend to be on the side of more gun control, especially when it pertains to assault weapons. And a little bit of history on this particular judge. So he's a judge based out of San Diego. He was appointed by George W. Bush in 2004. And this isn't the first time that he's ruled somewhat controversially on gun legislation. So not that long ago, he also, let me pull this up to make sure I quoted correctly, but he also had previously ruled that California's ban on high capacity magazines was unconstitutional. That lasted for 72 hours before it was reinstated. And then he also tried to strike down the restriction on remote purchases of gun ammunition. So there's a few different things that this judge has done. This is also something that has been worked on in tandem by a specific gun rights groups based out of San Diego County. So this isn't new, and if you live in California, you know that San Diego in particular is a very sort of purple area, reddish area. So you see a bit of Republican influence there on gun legislation. I tend to agree with banning assault weapons, especially here in California, as a Californian. I just don't see any reasonable explanation for why someone would need an AR-15. The notion that it would be somehow be for self-protection is absurd, especially when you consider that a lot of these guns can shoot through multiple layers of drywall. So to say that if someone breaks into your home and you're gonna somehow defend your home, your property with an AR-15, when that could very well not only like injure someone else in your family, but like shoot through walls into the neighbor's house. I just don't see that as a possibility, and the data backs that up, where they are rarely used for instances of self-defense. I also really don't see the need for using them. No one's going to use them if you're hunting. I think the only reasonable explanation that I've heard for owning and using an AR-15 is for people in Texas who go on those dope helicopter, like shooting feral hogs tours that you can do. I think that is a very reasonable use for like an AR-15 type gun. But again, you want to do that, go to Texas. And for those who are like, well, any of this is unconstitutional, I thought you liked states' rights. So where do states' rights end? That's all I have to say. And I say good luck to myself, because I think I'm the only one who is okay with this ban.
Colorado might be with you, but I see counterpoints. Like, as always, the love affair between Maddie and counterpoints grows. So counterpoints, go ahead and declare your emotions. And once again,
no, I'll go gentle or easy in the beginning. So basically,
in the
like,
beginning,
yeah, you gotta go slow, right, in the beginning. So, anyways, I'm sure my wife would love that. Anyways, so what's the reason for owning an AR-15? I think we really need to get back to fundamental moral axioms and see whether or not we agree with them anymore. So the Second Amendment is not about self-defense. The Second Amendment, unless you consider your self-defense against the state, it's not for hunting. It's not for any of that stuff. It's very specifically for the ability of the civilian populace to be able to resist a potentially tyrannical government. And there's the Federalist Papers, there's a Second Amendment, there's a whole bunch of founding father philosophy that basically says that governments are of, for, and by the people, and that the way to maintain this balance of power is by making sure that you have a armed populace. Justice Antonin Scalia basically came out and said that this is not an unlimited right. He doesn't want people to have nukes. He doesn't want people to have belt feds. Maybe Sprouticus and I will kind of separate on this a little bit. But basically the question is, where do we draw the line at where Americans could successfully resist the government? Whenever I get into, I'll try to make this brief. I know other people want to talk. I think that the American populace, if we had 19th century technology, literally like lever action cowboy guns and single action revolvers, 76 million people could still take on the federal government with 19th century technology. So then the question is, where do we draw the line? How do we balance public safety? I still want ARs and AKs to be legal because I think functionally they're similar enough to other platforms that they're not that much larger of a threat. And on top of that, you know what? I'm just going to leave it there. I have like 10 other fucking tangents and I'm just not going to stop talking. So I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. All right. I will go to Sprout, Omni, Shadows, and Katarana.
All right. If you look at the Second Amendment was not designed just solely for self-defense. As Counterpoints brilliantly pointed out, the Second Amendment was designed for the citizens to protect themselves from a tyrannical government. That is the way it was designed. You can read the Federalist Papers. You can find that out. With that being said, the AR-15 platform is not an M4 platform. Those are two different platforms. They are designed to look similar. They do not act in the same way. With that also being said, you brought up assault weapons. So if I hit someone with a bat, it now becomes an assault bat. If I put a staple into someone, guess what? That's now an assault stapler. Okay, assault is an action. It is not to define something. Assault is an action. If I take my pistol, it's now an assault pistol because I used it to assault. Okay, so it's not an assault weapon. It is an AR-15, which stands for Armor Light Rifle. What? I don't know what somebody said, but okay. It is an Armor Light rifle, okay? And so this is designed to keep us safe from a tyrannical government. And as you've seen, when guns get taken away, governments slowly become more tyrannical. You can see that throughout history. But continue. I'll yield the time.
Okay. Omni, Sprout, Katarana.
So I think that the sort of wait. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think that the divisions about the specifics of which guns have benefits that outweigh the costs, given that we all agree that there are, some weapons that can be regulated, we think people should not be able to have nukes. I think that almost all of us can be in agreement that the set of weapons that the government has chosen to restrict or prohibit is wrong in some way. So liberals will think, we don't ban enough guns. Conservatives will think that we ban too many guns. I think that the solution is that sort of could be a bipartisan solution is you let people have pretty expansive access to guns, but you require the manufacturer, if a gun is used to harm people, you require the manufacturer to pay. So the manufacturer would have an incentive to engage in sort of a privatized form of gun control to minimize the risk that the weapon would be used to harm people. So they would have an incentive to do effective background checks because they know that they would pay a fiscal cost. In terms of the point about resisting government tyranny, I don't think that this is I think that it's true etymologically that this is a major reason for why the Second Amendment arose in the first place. But I don't think that I don't think that it is as especially relevant today, except for constitutional considerations. I mean, obviously we have to consider the Constitution, but just as a practical matter of whether the policies will have more harms than benefits, I think it's relevant today, given that according to research I've seen by people like Chenoweth, generally it is violent revolutions that are more likely to result in large amounts of backlash, large amounts of killing and violence, and are actually significantly less likely than nonviolent revolutions to achieve the aim of the revolution. And particularly with very advanced military technology, I think that it is unlikely that a revolution would be able to be successful if it occurred in the 21st century. And it's equally likely that you could have a revolution where people sort of fight the government in ways that are harmful.
Sprout or Counterpoint, you have a direct response to Omni?
Yeah, I do.
So Counterpoints go first.
Yeah, sorry, I can be fairly brief. The reason why I wouldn't, as a person who's pro-gun, would never accept manufacturer responsibility or even seller responsibility or whatever. Like, I'm okay. Like, if they're selling to somebody who doesn't pass a background check, that's okay. But if you're talking about selling to somebody who passes a background check and then they harm or hurt or kill somebody else, then no. The answer is fundamentally no. That's fucking silly. Nobody's psychic. You don't sell car, like you don't do a background check on car drivers who have fucking who don't have DUIs, and then hold car manufacturers responsible for people who then go do DUIs and hurt or kill somebody. That's way too high of a bar. It's not feasible. It's not relevant. It's not possible. Resisting government is not a relevant issue today. This would be my argument is like, okay, so we've been fighting dudes in flip-flops with AK-47s and 2 mags shoved up their butts for like 20 years now. The ability to resist on a military level is not exclusively for like a military victory. Clausewitz said that war is diplomacy by other means. You can influence policy through violence. And there are some examples throughout history of governments that are nefarious enough that you should be able to resist them through violence. I would cite the CCP in the modern day. I would cite the Khmer Rouge. I would cite Nazi Germany. I would cite all of these as examples that even if the government was going to kill the shit out of you, violent resistance would still be the way to go. Finally, revolution won't be successful. Nonviolent revolution is better. Listen, I've had this conversation with Socialism Done Left, and it was basically like a meta-analysis of revolutions throughout history. And he was like, well, a nonviolent revolution has like a 40% chance of successful, and a violent revolution has a 25% chance of success. Those things are like looking at like a mono variable and then just like applying it and like extrapolating it out to the real world. The truth is, whether or not you're capable of having a peaceful revolution or a violent revolution is very much relevant to the material conditions that leftists love. So I'm just going to cite that to you and yield the floor.
Sprout, direct response.
So direct response to Omni. Having a manufacturer responsibility for weapons or for pistols, rifles, whatever you want to call them, it's irresponsible, because what's going to happen is that the weapon manufacturer is no longer going to be able to own their business, because they're going to be so scared of whatever someone may do 20 years later with their rifle that they sold in 20 years prior, that they're just not going to want to sell to anybody. You would essentially be banning guns through private industries. The industries wouldn't be able to survive because just that fear. And not only that, if you're going to talk about guns having a basically a liability, are we going to talk about other things having a liability? If you buy a car and you get a DUI, that car manufacturer is now liable for the DUI. If you buy a Louisville Slugger and hit someone over the head with it, that Louisville Slugger is now responsible for the hospital bills that you caused by hitting them over the head with the Louisville Slugger. Like, how far are you willing to go with this ideology before you go, okay, maybe it's not the best one?
Okay, we're gonna move down the list, but before I'll give Omni a chance to respond. No, we'll move down that list. So we'll go to after Omni will be Shadows, Katarana, Fnatic, could be Maddie. We got plenty of time, so we'll get to everybody.
Yeah. So in terms of what Counterpoint said about why, how we would not hold car manufacturers liable, the reason is because the problem of how to best avoid car accidents is generally a relatively simple problem. But the problem of how many guns people should have, such that the benefits of the marginal benefit of a gun outweighs the cost, is a very difficult problem. And it seems like when the government tries to figure out top down exactly what guns people should have, it fails miserably. So requiring people to internalize harms would solve the problem. In terms of the claim about how this would, from Spartacus about how this would be a de facto ban because people would never sell guns. There are two parts of the scheme that I forgot to mention that I think would make this not a problem. One is that if you use a gun and you use it in a way that helps saves civilians or stops a crime directly, then the manufacturer of the gun would get a financial reward. So they internalize both the costs and the benefits. And second is that they would be required to have a means of payment beforehand. So you would expect insurance schemes to be set up beforehand that would sort of cover the costs if the gun manufacturers sell it. But then they would, in order to remain profitable, they would impose certain requirements. So you get this, I think, more efficient privatized scheme, which works better than a top-down system. The last point about how revolutions should use violence. I mean, the Chenoweth study was comparative. It said specifically that if revolutionaries use violence relative to in cases where they don't use violence, generally, if they use violence, things go better. And so it wasn't just looking at correlation. It was actually looking at causation in terms of specific examples of revolutions. So for example, with like nonviolent protests recently over the summer, they generally resulted in the things they were protesting for being far more likely to pass. But violent revolutions helped the people who were opposed to the protest. I think the historical record is clear that attempting to resist the government with guns is not a very effective strategy. And even if there are isolated instances of it working, it's not as effective as alternatives.
Okay, so we'll go to Shadows, Colorado, Fanatic, Kobe, and Maddie. But do me one favor before Omni. Like, one, mute yourself. But two, like when you're talking, try to like lift your mic because you got a mic on your lapel thing, and it like rubs against your shirt, and then we all hear it. So just like give yourself and then when you're talking, just like lift it up or something, because that'll be very helpful. Thank you so much. All right, let's go to Shadows.
Yeah, so when it comes to the idea of holding manufacturers accountable, I think Omni's argument is probably better than the more common one, which I hear, which is that, oh, it'll, cause safer guns, and it will, make, guns that require biometric unlocking to be, more likely. The thing is, the cheapest gun on the market that requires a finger ID, last time I checked, was about $1,300 or $1,400. So yeah, those are not going to become cheaper anytime soon. The best way we can do that is with R&D, and just over time it will become cheaper. I think I think putting money towards R&D, especially at universities, is a good idea. But when it comes to the main thing I wanted to respond to initially was the self-defense argument, and the idea that the Second Amendment was not created for self-defense. While this is true, I think it is actually the most important reason to have it. Because the thing is, self-defense, the right to self-defense, is a human right. And that is why most conservatives will call the Second Amendment a, quote, God-given right. Because even if you don't believe in God, we would just call that a human right. And you have a human right to self-defense. That is not something that can be deprived from you. Even if people pin you down, you are going to try and wiggle and squeal your way out of it because you want to defend yourself. You have that innate reaction to fight back. So I think that's the most important reason why we can have the Second Amendment, is for self-defense, and defend, if your defense or the defense of people you love, like your family, is in jeopardy. I think that is the most important reason, or the best reason to have a gun. So yeah, I yield.
Tara now.
Yeah, so it's been a while, but as for Maddie earlier, I instinctively I'm not really a big fan of the appeal here, but I'm thinking perhaps there's just a chance that this legislation in particular just wasn't the most effective way of going about and doing gun control, and perhaps just based off of the stats, it didn't seem like anything significant came out of the move to go ahead and ban it. So I would say that I'm okay with the appeal here because it wasn't as successful as people wanted it to be. And also when it comes to assault weapons, I don't like them either. But also I can go ahead and prescribe the idea that what is the utility of this to like a lot of things that people happen to own. I don't think there's a utility in the majority of things that people decide to go ahead and collect. There's no reason to be for someone to own an AR, but there's also no reason to be for anyone to own like a sports car. So at the same time, yeah, I think hopefully with this being appealed, there could be some form of new legislation that's brought forward that does maybe a bit more analysis that will bring about some type of gun control that is more effective than this was.
Okay. So these goddamn liberals are coming for our sports cars. What's next? Our trophy wives? It's unbelievable.
Yes.
So let's go to well, I know someone's coming for our trophy wives. Fanatic, hey, how are you doing, buddy? So
you don't need liberals for that. Like, you got young black men like myself that is definitely coming for people's trophy wives. Specifically those. Anyway, yeah. So someone made a statement that I just felt like needed to be addressed. I can't remember who it was. I think it was the Sprouticus. Like, you kind of played fast and loose with definitions when you were like defining what an assault rifle is, right? Like, because while yes, like a weapon that does an assault is not what we're talking about when we're talking about assault rifles. I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Like, we know what an assault rifle is, and that's not like just any weapon that is used for assault is not considered an assault rifle, or any rifle that's used for assault is not considered an assault rifle. That's not what that is. But then someone else said something that was equally ridiculous, and they made the statement that car accidents are an easy problem to fix, whereas gun violence isn't. And that's just patently not true. So, like, in California, we have significantly less gun deaths per year than we do have car accidents. So it's clearly not something that's easy to fix. And of the gun deaths that we have per year, which is around 1,700, over 50% of those things are suicides, which is not an easy thing to fix and not an easy thing to control for. A lot of the time, those things like come on really rapidly, and it's really hard to even know that that it's coming. So yeah, I just think that's just not true at all. I'm going to say ultimately, I think the whole idea about a usurpacious government and that being like part of the drive behind why we need guns, I think it still holds up. And while I recognize that like the government has access to nukes and things like that, the government can't realistically use those things if they were trying to do something like usurpacious, because at the end of the day, like they would end up hitting so many citizens, right? Like they couldn't confront that in a meaningful, safe way, in a controlled way. And I think that it's a big enough discouragement to prevent it. Arming citizens is not because we would have the ability to win a conflict with trained military. It's about, it would create such a barrier, such an inhibitor in like them being able to completely just subvert people's will, that it eventually would become like something where it's like, yeah, we kind of got to go in a different direction. Like we have to be a little bit more considerate in the way that we're considering, overcoming the people or whatever. So I think, yeah, they're incredibly useful in just that alone. And I think ultimately, if you believe in the Constitution, you kind of have to hold on to that, because that's literally the reason why it was created. And again, if we're looking at violence, right, like, I don't even think the onus should be on us to be the ones determining, like, we have to come up with a reason for why we need them. You have to come up with a reason for why we should ban them. And considering any reason that you give me for why those should be banned could probably be better placed on handguns, I don't know how you could ever come up with an argument for why we should be getting rid of them.
Okay, I will go to Kobe, Maddie, Sprout, counter Ami.
I was addressed. Can I?
Okay.
Can I?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm being attacked for. Well, I guess I'm being came after for using the definition assault, right? And calling it assault bats or assault staplers, which it would be ridiculous to a lot of people in chat, right? Saying, "Oh, it's an assault stapler because someone used it to assault somebody." I used it to prove a point, which wasn't counteracted by Mr. Fanatic or PrimeCayes, is that they don't have a definition for assault weapon. They have a very loose definition, but they don't have a defined definition of what's an assault weapon and what isn't an assault weapon. They just pick and choose what they want. An AR-15 is extremely similar to other hunting rifles that they don't talk about. And so the AR-15 can actually be used as a hunting rifle to counter what PrimeCayes said. There's a round called a 300 Blackout that is commonly used for hunting. So I'll yield there.
Okay. We'll get Kobe, Maddie, counter Omni.
For sure. So, for one thing, I sympathize with Maddie wanting to point out the hypocrisy of states' rights stuff. Conservatives are very frustrating to argue with, but I would say in the realm of gun control, I actually think that having gun control that overrides states' rights is good, because having like Nevada having loose gun rights and then coming into California, that causes a problem, But that's like a minor thing. I spit on the Constitution. I'm joking. But the Constitution was written a bajillion years ago. I don't really care what the exact definition of it is. We should update it. The original Constitution said that black people weren't people and that women weren't shouldn't vote and whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't care. I'm sorry. Taxing gun manufacturers. I already talked about that. I don't really understand that, and so I don't really care. I don't like the guns and cars comparison because both are very dangerous, and we regulate cars like an insane amount. Right, like there are tons of cars that are not street legal. There's tons of certifications. We like have registration. There's you have to pay. I mean, I just said that I have to pay my car registration now. Like it sucks. And then so yeah, the right to self defense. I don't know. I don't really want to talk about this because I feel like it feels kind of cringe because it's like the idea that like, well, you have rights to self-defense, so you have the right to a specific commodity. Seems kind of like a logical leap there. Do I have a right to a nuclear weapon? I don't know. But I want to ask to the people that are pro the idea that it is possible for it ever for us to overthrow the government through armed force. Is there an example in like modern history, so we'll say post World War II, of an industrialized country, like an industrialized liberal democracy like us, that successfully had a violent revolution? I can't think of any. Like I really can't. Like it seems all the revolutions post World War II have been in either colonial states or dictatorial states. But I'd wonder what the examples would be from people on the panel.
Okay. Next, Maddie counter Omni.
Yeah, a few points I wanted to make here. First, to sprout a kiss about, well, what is an assault weapon? Like if I use a stapler, that's an assault stapler, whatever. Look, we're all adults here having an adult conversation, right? In this context, we are referring to the legal definition as outlined in that law's text because that's what was repealed. So when you write legislation, what you have to do, or any contract for that matter, you have to establish definitions of terms in the initial part or opening section of that legislation. So what I'm going to do, because I was looking at the actual bill text, I can link you to it so you can check out how they define assault weapons. Because you know what, you're right. Like when we're just talking about it in everyday discussions or in the medias, I think it refers to a number of different things. People can say assault rifle or assault weapon and mean a lot of different things. In this specific context, we are referring to the legal definition and what is outlined in this specific bill, because that is what is being discussed. So, I know maybe you were confused about well, what are we talking about? Assault weapon, like anything's an assault weapon. No, lawyers would disagree. And there is a specific definition of what constitutes an assault weapon. I would read it, but there are a lot of people that want to talk, so I won't waste your time, but I will link you to it.
I mean, I love the ad hominem attacks. So
yeah,
I mean,
okay.
just keep them
well,
coming.
Thank you. Anyways, so also I think there's people saying, oh, but I need it to protect me from a tyrannical government. Because listen, I fundamentally do agree that there needs to be I want citizens to feel empowered against their government. I don't want to cultivate a society where people feel like there's nothing they can do and that they are at risk of being, oppressed or taking over, or have the government sort of suppress their rights. I agree. But what is a more real and relevant threat to my life and health and well-being right now in this moment, and I would probably say the same for everyone, is not a tyrannical government looking to knock down my door and murder me. It's people being able to own guns that have a huge capacity to murder or maim as many people as possible, as quickly and efficiently as possible. Just down the street from where I grew up in San Jose, recently, a gunman murdered, I think it was, I forget what the final death count was, but a number of people that work for our public transit system here. When I worked at Google, in the same building that I was in that day, a gunman came on campus and shot someone. I remember having to evacuate and watch as all the sirens came in, not knowing what was happening. It was fucking terrifying. And I don't know, that's the thing. It's the bigger threat to my livelihood, to my life and well-being, so the bigger threat to my family and friends and the people I love is not a tyrannical government. It's people having easy access to guns and guns of war. And that's I don't know. That's why it's hard for me to say, oh, but we have to weigh how important it is to be able to stand up and protect yourself from a tyrannical government. Because I'm like, that's not who I'm worried about protecting myself from right now.
Great. So
yeah, I'm not done. I'm not done. But then I'll welcome rebuttals and other points that you guys want to talk about. And then also just the last point I want to make is that, for victims of gun violence, like, oh, well, should they be able to sue gun manufacturers, and why, oh, but if you get hit by a car, you can't sue Ford. And I think an important distinction there to be made is that cars aren't specifically designed to kill or murder people, whereas guns are specifically designed to kill or maim people, like whether it's people, whether it's an animal, whatever, but they are specifically designed to kill and maim as efficiently and quickly as possible. So I don't think it's unreasonable I don't know if that should amount necessarily to suing gun manufacturers. I think that's like a different conversation to be had, but that's why I think they reasonably should be treated differently than something like a car.
Fanatic, if you want to directly address Maddie, I'll let you go. Then we'll go to Counter, Omni, and Shadows.
I mean, she just said so much. I literally don't even remember the point. I should have taken notes down. It was. I can't remember. Do you remember what I interjected with because it was stupid?
What did I say that was stupid? No, I think I was talking about owning a gun and protecting oneself against tyrannical government.
There we go. I got you. Mm-hmm. So you were saying about like, I think the thing that I should be more concerned with is like, like that this constitutes like a better threat such that I should be more concerned with it, like people having access to weapons and things like that. But with that line of logic, then that means you would be okay with them completely getting rid of handguns, right? And you should be more concerned with getting rid of handguns than you should with assault weapons, right?
So I feel different. Here's the thing, like, because I recognize in a perfect ideal world, I would prefer to live in a society without guns. However, I know that's not realistic. I know that's not realistic in this country. And the difference between something like an AR-15 and a handgun is that, like, handguns are actually, like, if someone is going to successfully, like, defend themselves from an intruder or someone attacking them, they are more likely to successfully protect themselves if they're armed with a handgun than they are with an AR-15, because AR-15 simply aren't used for like self-defense, that sort of thing. Right. So I guess in my mind, I see that I see the value more in a handgun than I do. And handguns can't kill as many people as quickly as something like an AR-15.
Sure. Like, but the argument is not whether or not something can. It's about what happens. And in this country, I think it's reasonable to say that it just so happens to be that in this country, handguns kill significantly more people. So if the argument that you're going to use to defend getting rid of handguns is going to be something like it's going to be like for safety, then you have to be consistent, and then that means that you have to. If your argument for getting rid of those other weapons is safety driven, then that means you have to be in favor of getting rid of handguns. Other than that, then you're literally logically inconsistent, right?
I would love to, truly, but again, like, I know that just politically feasible, like the feasibility of like saying we need to get rid of handguns, I don't think that's just politically feasible right now. I personally would love to. So I think maybe that's why, if we want to talk about like, oh, well, is it like logically inconsistent? Potentially, but I also kind of factor in the plausibility of actually putting through legislation to enact these changes. And I just don't see anything like a handgun ban being feasible in this current political climate. So one way to essentially do some form of harm reduction would be to remove a weapon that is responsible for a number of these mass shootings, where I don't know that there is much utility for owning those weapons beyond being able to say they're cool. But I get you. Like it admittedly isn't like.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're really going to get down to the heart of it, right? Like, I mean, someone mentioned that San Jose shooter like had 3 semi-automatic handguns, right? Like that's what that recent event was about.
Mm-hmm.
Used handguns there. So you should be literally arguing for for getting rid of handguns. And since we know, since like the weapons, assault rifles are like super duper minority. Like the idea is like it boggles my mind that we put energy forward towards getting rid of those things when we know what the actual threat is. It'd be like finding out that people are using arsenic to poison, I don't know, large amounts of people, and then we're deciding, yeah, I get that, but anthrax has so much more lethal potential. Let's focus energy towards anthrax. It's just ridiculous. Like, focus where the actual energy is. But now we know what the actual energy is. The actual energy is you want to get rid of handguns, but you just can't do it because it's not politically viable, because everyone recognizes how important guns are for self-defense. Everyone recognizes how important it's literally part of the Second Amendment right. And once you get rid of handguns, it seems like it gets a little bit absurd. So yeah, I mean, as long as you're willing to admit that it's logically untenable, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't think there's much more to it.
No, but let me just respond really quickly. But yeah, so my whole thing isn't that like it's politically untenable because people recognize the value of self-protection using handguns. It's because that gun culture and the Second Amendment, all this, and the notion, and that because handguns are so much more popular and owned than something like an assault rifle, assault weapon, whatever. That is why it's politically untenable. But I get it. Like, I think, I'm the first to admit when maybe one of my arguments isn't like the most consistent because I have nuance in how I approach some of these things. Would I love to get rid of handguns too? Because you're right. Like, by following that logic, we should, because handguns are used for all of those shootings. Hell yeah, I would love to get rid of them because I don't think they make people safer. I don't think they're a useful tool for self-protection. However, I recognize that the vast majority of Americans don't agree with that. The vast majority of Americans very much value their ability to own a handgun. So I figure, I'd rather look for middle ground and areas where I can reduce harm and make the country safer by making some sort of compromise. And that to me is where I saw the compromise.
So we're going to counter Omni, Shadow, Sprout, Kobe, Karan.
Yeah, so what this boils down to, because we keep hitting surface level stuff that I'm going to get into in a second, but basically this boils down to a fundamental axiomatic belief. Do you think that people have the right to resist and destroy their own government with force, with weapons, or do you not? There's plenty of examples of governments throughout history that have said that that's not a thing. The UK, the Commonwealth, there's all sorts of countries that basically say that no, you don't have basically this unfettered right to destroy the government. And not all of them are nightmare dystopias. Depends on your definition of nightmare dystopia. They're nightmare dystopias to me, but I'm sure we're nightmare dystopias to them. So instead of going down to fundamental axiomatic beliefs, let's hit some of the surface stuff that you guys talked about. So basically, Kobe brought up hey, are there any examples of industrialized countries that have had successful violent revolutions since World War II? That's kind of a weird that they have to be industrialized in order for political balance of power to be important. So for instance, if you think that Vietnam was a decolonized state and not an industrialized state, you can actually say that the war in Vietnam was actually won by dudes in sandals with assault rifles, because that's what a majority of the fighting was basically militias that eroded the political will of the military. The reason why I bring that up is because I was literally talking about the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was actually a military and strategic and tactical disaster for North Vietnamese forces, but it was a political victory. It actually helped cement the United States' withdrawal through Vietnam. So I would see that as a successful revolution by dudes in sandals with AKs. We need to update the Constitution. It was written 1 million years ago. There's the problem that I have with this mentality. What really frustrates me about people who are oh, those are just a bunch of old slave owners, we shouldn't listen to what they say. Marcus Aurelius was the fucking emperor of Rome. He said shit that's incredibly relevant, and he lived fucking 1900 years ago. If a problem and the solution to that problem are articulated by an intelligent person who lived 1900 years ago, it doesn't matter if the problem and the solution to that problem still exist. Time is not a factor. The question is, what is the problem and what is the solution to that problem, and does that still apply today? And specifically when it comes to balance of power politics and conflict in general, I think the founding fathers are exactly on point. So examples of industrialized countries, again, maybe the Soviet states would be a better example, in which factions of the military went with militias and then had successful revolutions, but they had to have access to military grade weaponry in order to have successful revolutions against Soviet states. I have like 10 other points, but I don't want to monopolize all of the time. So I'll yield there, and then if you could just add me back to the list, I'd be very appreciative.
Oh,
Could
wow.
I please respond? Could I respond really quickly?
Sure.
Okay, so I have 3 quick responses. First one is, just because an old figure has a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that they have all the vital information. I know that you would agree with this. Like Socrates believed that blood was pushed through the body by spirits, right? Like you can have. I feel like it's not a good idea to bring up like the founding fathers because they have some good ideas. I would agree in general, but like we're talking about specific policy. I don't know if that's relevant. The second one is whether or not the country was industrialized is important to me because we're crafting policy for an industrialized country. We're not talking about Vietnam, which was a colonized state, which is we can talk about that for very, very complicated for a long time. But that I think that factors in to the how much of a series, how much of a infrastructure you have to actually destroy to fight a government in a colonized state versus industrialized state. And lastly, do you have the right to overthrow a government, and do you have the right to overthrow the government with a specific commodity, or 2 different arguments? That's the argument that I would make. Portugal overthrew the government relatively peacefully. They didn't, it was, it was like a bloodless revolution. I think that you can have the right to overthrow the government while also banning specific commodities, i.e., nukes, i.e., I don't know, mustard gas or something. Sorry for interrupting.
All right, let's go to Shadow Sprout. Sorry, Omni, Shadow Sprout, Kobe, Katarana counter.
I think that, so in terms of the benefits, the policy that I advocate, I think most of the benefits were not really addressed. In that, one, you would expect it to result in better policy, because if what people on the right say is true, that guns generally have far more benefits than costs, well then if we made it so that people both got financial benefits from if they're used to stop crimes, and then paid if they're used to commit crimes, then you would expect guns to serve then you would expect that to be helpful to manufacturers. But if what people on the left say is true, that the dangers of guns outweigh the benefits, then you would expect it to be harmful to manufacturers. And you would particularly expect manufacturers to engage in their own privatized form of effective gun control rather than a top-down, one-size-fits-all solution that's less effective, which I think is why economists overwhelmingly favor market-based schemes more than the general population. And so, for example, 81% of economists support a market-based scheme in terms of environmental policy. What Maddie was saying about how it's a bigger threat to her, I think is clearly irrelevant. I mean, oppressive governments have killed like 100 million people in the 20th century. Regardless of what is a bigger threat to individuals, obviously oppressive governments is a major threat overall. However, I think that even though oppressive government is a risk, it's not clear that guns would increase our ability to resist these oppressive governments, given that I think violent revolutions are generally less successful than non-violent revolutions, even controlling for other factors. The point about car accident versus guns that was raised by Mr. Fanatic, I think Mr. Fanatic missed the point that I was raising. The point that I was raising was not that car accidents are an easier problem to solve, but rather, or it's not that it's a smaller problem, but rather that generally the solution is simpler, such that what kind of restrictions we should have on people who can drive is not that a very politically contentious issue. But I mean, maybe I would support like a Pigouvian scheme for car manufacturers to encourage figuring out better ways of doing it. I don't really know. But I mean, I think that the general problem raised with guns is that if I sell a gun to someone and they use it to commit a crime, the person who sells the gun to them does not bear the cost that's imposed upon society. And they also don't reap the reward. And so making them both bear the cost and reap the rewards, I think would result in in more efficient guns. Now, I agree with what was said about how handguns are the result of the majority of gun deaths. And so I think that big, scary rifles are generally a bit of a red herring. Which is why I think that a more sensible scheme would be to, I mean, if I like my scheme, obviously, but the Pigouvian scheme, but I think that would likely result in more restrictions of things like handguns proportional to assault weapons, given that I think handguns are where where a lot of the deaths come from. And I think if I had to guess, I would say that they would probably be less likely to not sell certain type of guns in response to the market-based system, and more likely to instead do more background checks, so they don't restrict what types of guns can be sold, but rather they restrict who gets the guns, given that most of them are done with handguns. Most crimes.
Okay, so let's go.
Yeah, I don't.
Let's go to. Sorry, I just want to move. I want to move it down. Shadow Sprout, Kobe, Katarana counter. I can put you on the list though.
Okay, so I thankfully actually wrote down some notes from what Maddie was saying, but first to respond to Omni's thing, I think when it comes to market-based solutions, and regarding the protections of gun manufacturers, I don't think that we should hold them responsible, but I think if people want to try to, via, the legal route, I think they 100% should. It would be nice if we could actually see some class action lawsuits from towards gun manufacturers when there are mass shootings. I think these sort of protections that gun manufacturers get from lawsuits is fucking insane. We definitely need to tear those down. I think that would be a good start. But to move on to Maddie's point, I think we have already, kind of beaten to the ground what the definition of assault weapons is. But you also use like the quote weapons of war, which one I don't like, and two is not necessarily true. It's more often that automatic rifles are used than semi-automatic. And also, you also mentioned it's not politically feasible to get rid of handguns. So I hope you realize that if we're talking about political feasibility and political capital, that it is a fucking ridiculous idea to try and pass any gun reform before the 2022 Senate elections, considering we have 3 states we could win. One in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Ohio. These are states where gun culture is very much prevalent. And trying to pass any type of gun control at the federal level is not going to help our chances remotely. So I hope you acknowledge that. And then I also had that point about the tyrannical government. So, but I'll yield.
Could I respond really quickly?
Very quickly.
I promise. Okay. So actually, we talk about like, oh, but we have all these seats up for election coming in 2022, including places like Ohio, Wisconsin, whatever, Pennsylvania. Here's the cool thing about gun control reform and people wanting stricter gun control. That is largely supported by the vast cross-section of the American people, including a majority of Republicans, people that self-identify as Republicans, I believe, and I'll find the actual statistic, but it's something like 55% of Republicans are in favor of instituting stricter gun control measures, including things like universal background checks, things like closing the gun show loophole. So, when we talk about, oh, but this, could threaten our chances for winning back the Senate or whatever, that's simply not true, and that's fear mongering because Americans want better gun control and they want this passed. And as they want it across the aisle, what's stopping us from passing gun reform are gun rights lobbying groups, PACs, formally, not really much right now, the NRA and gun manufacturing lobbying groups who don't want their revenue to be cut.
Wait, can we address that really quick? Because you just said a bunch of nonsense.
No, I know, and I'll find the.
They don't.
You don't need to. You don't have to, because what you're saying is complete nonsense. You're literally doing selective hearing. Well, it is. It's selective hearing, because at the end of the day, people do want specific types of legislation. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about banning weapons. Do people want background checks? Sure.
Banned.
Do they want assault rifles bans? No, those are 2 totally different things. So simply pointing out people want reform is a very broad term. Yes, people want reform. They don't want bans, and that's what we're talking about here. Stop.
Okay, I was going to say that because she mentioned 2 things that do have majority support from Republicans, and it is true. They do want universal background checks. They do want to show us the gun show loophole. The correct term, by the way, is private seller loophole, because there are certain sellers that aren't listed. If you go to a gun show, there are guns that you'll try and buy where you actually will have to go through a background check. You want to know why? Because these are certified gun sellers that have a vending license. But you don't need a vending license. You don't need to be certified to sell guns, and you can still sell a gun. So that is, just pointing out. But the thing is, even if we're going to pass gun control at the federal level, it's not going to be those 2 things. It never is. It never is. We never pass bills that small. That is just unlikely. There are going to be a multitude of other things, and it's going to be a much larger
state law. We're also talking about a state law here too. So I know that we want to talk about political feasibility, whatever, at the federal level, but to also sort of like respond to that, what we're talking about in this term right now is a California state law. And so I don't know how helpful it is. I mean, again, we can go down that road and sort of debate the nuance of that. But like this specific topic is about the repealing of a state law where we banned assault weapons. So talking about the national feasibility, political feasibility of that, I don't know. I guess I just don't necessarily see the parallel.
Okay,
Well, you're talking about
or the
nationally.
usefulness of talking
got-
about federal.
We're going to let some other people in. Sprout, Kobe, Katarana, Contra, and Fanatic.
Okay, so when that bitch, as its preferred pronoun, so when she was talking about the definition of assault weapons,
No, he's right.
it is a preferred pronoun. It's down there.
He's
I
being
looked at it.
respectful.
It's
I
respecting
looked at
her
it.
pronouns.
Thank you for seeing me, Spraticus. Thank you.
Not a problem. I love using preferred pronouns. California's definition of assault weapons is, in short, a semi-automatic centerfire rifle that has an overall length of less than 30 inches. A semi-automatic pistol that has the capacity to accept a detachable magazine in any one of the following: a threaded barrel capable of accepting a flash suppressor, forward hand grip, or silencer. And as we were talking about, everyone's like, "Oh, we love handguns. Okay, it's not politically feasible to get rid of handguns." That is underneath the definition of the California's definition of assault weapons. And to bring up stuff that's outside of what the California bill is disingenuous to say the least, because we're talking about California's bill. We're not talking about other things that Republicans want. Republicans are not pro the California bill, okay? So to bring up that 55% of Republicans are pro the California bill is absolutely disingenuous to say
That's
the
not what I
absolute
said.
least.
Is it my go?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll yield.
So
I don't think they have that polling on the California bill, but okay.
yeah,
Go ahead,
so
Kobe.
I was looking up some data here, and so I'm I was kind of half listening. I'm not exactly sure what the precise thing now you said, but I'm pretty sure she's correct here. I'll put it in chat, but it looks like a 2017 Pew poll of Americans say that 48% of gun owners and 77% of non-gun owning adults, 77% of non-gun owning adults strongly support or somewhat favor banning assault style weapons. So I don't know. It seems like there is support here. I mean, even if I don't know, it seems there. Other than that, I just wanted to very briefly just kind of build on something I said earlier to counterpoints. I think which is relevant. I think that when we're looking at countries that have fundamentally different infrastructures, a fundamentally different construction of their industrialization to America, which I would say that these places like say Algeria or Vietnam, which are examples of more modern revolutions, these are examples of that. I think that it's very difficult to try to translate them to America. There's so many, as you said, the material conditions of modern America are so complicated and so much more different that I really don't think it's viable. But I would love to have further sort of dialogue on this with you and anybody else, because I think that's a little bit of a off topic. I'd like to just very briefly though, for my last thing here, address the kind of the core of one of the questions was asked by Prime, which is like, does this ruling kind of mean that like all banning on firearms is unconstitutional? I would argue that's one of the reasons I really don't like the Second Amendment is because it is written in a very different context, and nowadays there's what it means to have a weapon or a firearm is very complicated. And I think that you need to update these things in a big structural way. So yeah, anyways, that's my take.
Katarana, Counter, Fanatic.
Just have you go next, because there's like so many people that you forget what you were trying to say like 20 minutes earlier, so I can
Counter, Fanatic. Oh wow,
You're muted.
so brilliant. So brilliant. And so eloquent. That's what he's known for. He's even more brilliant. And he's more eloquent. Okay, alright, well anyway, if we go to Fanatic. Fanatic, can you out top his eloquence?
I think I can. I don't know. I was afraid that I was. Actually, I thought I was going to be muted. I think, what's it called? Omni. I think you're really missing the point of the challenge, right? Like when I was pointing out that the car accident thing, it wasn't like, it was to point out like that your statement that these are easier to address or easier to fix is not true. Because if it was easier to fix, we would see less of that than we do of the other thing. But we don't. And the reason why we don't is because it's not something that's easier to fix. Like it's a big problem. Not something that I'm saying that we need to do some crazy legislation to deal with. It's just kind of the human condition. But I don't know. I think this whole idea about like, oh, car accidents can be like completely controlled for really simply. Like I just don't think that's true at all. I think that's what I was trying to get at. Like I don't know if you're missing that, but that's yeah, that was the point I was trying to make.
Okay.
I'm available.
Okay, we'll go then counter the Omni.
Okay, so my dog knocked out my power, so I'm gonna blame my dog that time. So you guys keep giving me too much good shit that takes me way too long to address. So just to address the market-based schemes for guns, I'm basically going to use Maddie's appeal, which is like pragmatically, this just isn't going to fucking happen. It's just not going to happen. Okay, that nobody's going to go for the market-based thing. The anti-gun people are not going to go for the thing. The pro-gun people are not going to go for the thing. Whether or not it would solve the problems, maybe the fucking manufacturers will come up with some like changeling gun that like it's like a transformer, and depending on like legal context, it like shifts in your hand to be like an assault rifle if you're fighting the government, or a pistol if you're defending your house, or a fucking taser if you're defending yourself against somebody who doesn't have a weapon or something. I don't fucking know. I just don't think that like the market can solve all these problems, and I also don't think like liability insurance is going to solve all these problems, and also the political feasibility of this is like zero. So while it might be theoretically good and you're using theoretical market forces in order to address the problem, I just don't think pragmatically it's there. Kobe, we basically need to have like a 2-hour discussion on like post-industrial nations and revolutions. Unfortunately, I don't feel equipped in the time I have to address all of that. So I'm just going to address Maddie because that's fun, because we like to beef. So the technical efficiency is what righties are chipping away at when they're saying like the assault weapons definition is like nebulous or stupid or whatever. There are plenty of products that are on the market right now that are just as efficient at killing people as so-called assault weapons. The reason why Republicans or pro-gun people take an issue with the assault weapon definition is because they're like the Virginia Tech shooting had 32 people killed, and the gentleman used a 22 long rifle pistol and a 9mm pistol. Oftentimes it's the environment, the context, whether or not it's a soft target, whether or not it's a hard target. There's a whole bunch of other things that like go into the calculus of how a mass shooting unfolds or how a terrorist attack unfolds. Also with it's not the government that's a threat, it's mass shooters. On a statistics basis, this is just incorrect. Whether or not we're talking about American intervention overseas, killing civilians and foreign nationals, or if we're talking about cops killing people on an annual basis. Cops kill about 1,000 American civilians on an annual basis. I think mass shooters maybe kill like 30. And then also like we're saying all of these things within the age of Trump. Trump was like a neo-fascist dictator who's like reviving white supremacy and is on the like verge of like basically killing all the brown people, or deporting all the brown people and killing all the black people. So how can we say this with a straight face that like, oh, we don't want weapons of war in order to resist a tyrannical government in an industrialized nation, when we're also saying outside the other side of our mouth that Trump is a neo-fascist dictator that has like corrupted, convoluted, and nearly destroyed some of our social institutions that are holding our societal fabric together. Basically, finally, I want to point out, because like oftentimes it comes down to like almost like I want people to be nuanced. The Commonwealth hasn't banned weapons altogether. In Canada, they have access to rifles and shotguns and pistols and all that kind of stuff, but you basically have to get permission from your local sheriff in order to have a gun. Same thing with the UK. But what happens as a result of this, it's like, yeah, you reduce homicides by a significant amount, I think by 2/3. But then also what ends up happening is your freedom or right to self-defense is at the whim of your local magistrate. You do not have the ability to get a weapon unless your local sheriff wants you to have one. And then it becomes a privilege, not a right. And it becomes a privilege that only the government can extend to you. So I just want people to know that like in the UK and Canada, they haven't banned firearms. They've just made them a privilege of the wealthy and connected. And I think that's incredibly fucked up. And I yield right there.
All right, we will go to Omni, and then yeah.
So I think the point that Counterpoints raised about political feasibility is definitely true, that it's not politically feasible. But I mean, I'm not advocating like activists trying to get it passed in Congress, because it's unlikely to pass. I just think that it's an interesting idea that should be discussed. And the only way that ideas that are interesting to talk about ever become politically feasible is if enough people talk about them and discuss them. The fact that a policy will not pass is not an argument as to why the policy should not pass. The point that was made about Trump, it was to show why I think resisting government tyranny it will often do more harm than good. I mean, I think that Trump's immigration policy was bad, but I don't think that it would have been good if immigrants who are going to be deported had just started shooting members of ICE. And there had just been a lot of them shooting members of ICE. That just seems like it would result in, more violence, more backlash, etc. And I think that the historical record.
So what if he was dragging them to camps in order to do forced hysterectomies? Would they be justified then to do it?
I mean, maybe the people who are getting forced hysterectomies would, but the thing is, if we just look throughout history generally, when revolutions employ violence, they are less likely to achieve their goals, and they're more likely to result in backlash. So it seems better to not use violence. Furthermore, I think
but here's my problem, because you've said this, and I'm sorry for the back and forth, Prime, but I think it'll be fun. Would you say this to an Armenian in Turkey in 1930 or 1940? Would you say this to a Jew in Germany in 1930 and 1940, that they shouldn't resist the government with force because there's a statistically higher likelihood that pacifistic means are going to result in a better result?
I mean, maybe
I wouldn't.
Well, okay. I mean, if a policy is going to result in if your action is going to result in people being shot, B, you being less likely to achieve your goals, and C, there being more backlash from wider society, which results in more overall oppression, even if the motives of the people who are employing violence are laudable, I think that the method is ineffective and will result in more violence. But the more important point is, I think that if there is tyranny in the United States, it is unlikely to come from a small group of top-down dictators. It is far more likely to come from a large mass of people who are in favor of oppressive policies. And I think that, if 90% of Americans support a policy that involves oppressing 5% of the population, then if the 5% of the population starts shooting people, I generally think that the historical record shows that's not a very good way of preventing the specific form of tyranny.
Kobe, give it. Once you're done, Kobe, give it a try.
Yeah. The last point is, I think that the point that was raised by Mr. Fanatic about how car accident deaths are something that kill more people. I think that that's true. The distinction that I would draw is I think that there is a huge amount of political conflict over what is the best form of gun control. There is very little political conflict over whether we should add more things to driver's tests or not. And so it's a problem that increased market-based solutions would not result in solutions that work that well. But I mean, based on what you said, I think there's a case for maybe having a Pigouvian based scheme. But yeah, I think that if the gun control scheme would be effective at saving lives, then we should do it.
Okay, let's go to Kobe.
Just to briefly respond, I would say that telling an oppressed group that a specific method of resistance is less or more effective is pretty categorically different than telling them that resistance in and of itself is not something they should do. So I would argue that that's sort of what Omni is saying here, is that the specific form of resistance is not going to get them the things they not going to get them what they would like, right?
Sure, but okay, and Prime, I'll be brief, but this is where I feel like macroscopic analysis loses the microscopic. So I'm not going to show up to a Rohingya Muslim on the west side of Burma right now and be like, hey bro, have you ever thought about peacefully protesting instead of shooting the soldiers that are coming to massacre you and your family? Of course I'm not going to fucking say that shit. So even on the whole, if there was a mass protest, if a mass protest between Rohingya Muslims and sympathetic Burmese folk would yield a better result in which the Rohingya overall would be would have a more utilitarian, macroscopic, better result, I think that can be true. While at the same time, on the interpersonal level, if I go and tell that guy that thing, hey, have you tried basically a peaceful organizational cross Burmese thing, and then the soldiers show up the next day and they fucking execute his ass, he's not going to be the person who actually benefits from that macroscopic 10 fucking head utilitarian fucking movement. And on top of that, basically he's not going to be able to enjoy the analysis that you're providing him because he's going to be fucking dead. So that's kind of where the microscopic and the macroscopic have to have a relationship. They are not divorced from each other.
I just to briefly, I actually completely agree with you. I just feel like I do feel like we're still kind of talking past each other. What the advice I'd give to an individual is not the same that advice I'd give to a group or to give to a political organization. But I do get your point that needs to be factored in.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I left the call again. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. All right. Anyone else? No one else?
Oh, I mean, I have 10,000 other fucking things to say.
Okay,
You fucking
go
kidding?
ahead.
All right, well, this could be a closing if we're thinking about moving on. So basically, Shadows said something that triggered the piss out of me, and I love you, Shadows. But basically, like, we should. It's insane that like gun manufacturers don't have the ability to have class action lawsuits brought against them. As every lefty has so clearly articulated within this panel, is that a gun is designed to kill and to maim. That is its purpose. So if a gun fires and it hurts or kills a person, it's fulfilling its designated purpose. What's happening is that can either be done in a legal context or that's being done in an illicit context. So it's pretty clear that the liable party in this situation is not the person who created a firearm that does its function as performed. It's the person who's committing the illicit act. So that's kind of where like the movement of liability from like the individual to the corporation is fucking weird. And like I understand like to segue in like Omni's perspective, like so for me the amount of liability that would be needed, like you're right, like in order for gun manufacturers to sell anything except for fucking BB guns or tear gas or like fucking pepper ball guns, they would basically need to create like a user insurance scheme in which like liability was distributed across all gun owners. That is the only way in which these like costs could be borne by the industry, by gun manufacturers, and by private citizens.
Omni, does that make sense?
I mean, it was his point, so I hope it makes sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree that there would be liability schemes, but the point is, given that the liabilities that the sort of insurance market would have an incentive to make profit, and the way that they make profit is by through a combination of making sure that the guns save the most lives and cause the fewest deaths. You'd expect, for instance, them to impose certain requirements on people in order to pay for the insurance scheme. So like in order for you to get our insurance, you have to like do background checks, and it would, rather than a sort of inefficient top-down government system, it would result in a system.
But as a white man who doesn't live in the ghetto, okay, this could be cost prohibitive for some of our folks who have been discriminated against historically and don't have access to higher levels of means, of like material means. So basically, what you're saying is you can't get a gun unless you can buy into the insurance scheme. Well, that leaves an entire set of people who are uninsurable or can't have access to the firearms because they're fucking poor. So they probably can barely afford the gun, let alone the insurance scheme. And so basically, if you're let's say a pizza delivery driver who's working for a mom and pop shop delivering in the fucking hood, and your mom and pop shop gives you permission to have a CWP because we all know that being a pizza delivery driver is more dangerous than being a cop, then you're just not going to be able to defend yourself, and that's fucked up. So insurance doesn't solve everything. The private market doesn't solve everything. There are market failures, and I would see that as one.
I would like to interject because Connor talked about...
Can I just say something really fast? Because what you said was direct response. Just to clarify, the scheme, it would be an insurance market for the sellers of guns rather than for the individual buyers of guns. And if you're worried about the cost of guns being prohibitive, then I guess you could like use the funds raised to like give subsidies for people to own guns or something. I don't know. Or to like fund programs that give money to low-income people.
Well, listen, if CTV was here, he would have a raging fucking boner for everything you've said because it's all market-based solutions. So even if I don't agree with it, I appreciate your thought process.
I agree with that too. I think the free market is pretty base, and I should probably try and talk to you one-on-one sometime. I think I could blackpill you into neoliberalism. So.
Oh God!
But to respond to what you guys are both saying, because you are mentioning, insurance schemes, and something that insurance obviously is meant to do is insure you and cover you when accidents happen. And a very common accident, believe it or not, with a lot of firearm owners who are irresponsible, I may add. I hope, Connor, you are very responsible and you keep your gun in a lockbox at least 6 feet above the ground so your small child cannot get to it. But a lot of gun owners are not nearly as responsible as you. And there have been, believe it or not, the amount of injuries caused between 2000 and 2010 because the little kids find access to daddy's gun is more than the injuries caused from mass shootings. That's just injuries, so that's not factoring deaths, obviously. But yeah, so my thing is, if a child is easily able to access a gun and easily turn off the safety, and someone's like, hey, I don't think my 5-year-old child should be able to turn off the safety, I'm suing you for having such an ineffective safety. I don't see, I feel like you have to at least agree that the level of protections from lawsuits from gun makers is too high a bar of entry. I don't get how you're saying it's not too high. I feel like it should be easier to sue them. Whether or not, it actually goes through is another story, but they should at least be able to sue. I just don't get your argument.
Wait, Shadows. My personal pistol, I carried M&P 2.0, does not have a safety on it. So are you saying that I can sue them because my pistol was given to me without a safety, even though that's the way I bought it?
No, I was mentioning, an instance where a kid is able to turn off a safety. I don't know why you own a gun without a safety.
Most guns nowadays don't have safeties.
I own a gun without a safety because, one, I have trigger discipline to where I don't put my finger on the trigger unless I'm planning on shooting whatever's in front of me. 2, my trigger actually has a safety inside of it to where if something catches the trigger, it won't fire. So if something accidentally just taps the trigger, it won't fire. It's a design safety to where you have to have your finger on the trigger and pulling for it to actually fire. If you put a string on it, it won't fire. And so it does not have a designed mechanical safety. Also, mechanical safeties can and will fail. Mechanical safeties are not 100%. So just because you have a mechanical safety on does not mean that gun will not shoot, which is why you're taught again and again and again in firearm safeties class that you do not point a weapon at anything you are not intending to shoot. It doesn't matter if the safety's on, it doesn't matter if it's loaded. An unloaded weapon is a loaded weapon. You point it at what you're intending to shoot, and you don't put your finger on the trigger until you are ready to destroy whatever is downrange.
Fair enough. All right. I'd like to say something to Connor, to apply something you said long ago, talking about whether the heart of this matter is the axiomatic principle of whether you can defend yourself from the government or not. That's what it is to conservatives. That's what conservatives like to think, right? But the people calling for gun reform, that's never the case, right? We're never talking about that. We're talking about the lives that are lost within our communities every day, right? Not your imagined cowboy fantasies of taking down the government where you and your buddies, your drinking buddies, will go down and take down your local Gestapo club, right? It's just not the way it works, right? That's what we're talking about, is actually keeping community safe, and not whatever you've been thinking. So I guess a deep disagreement, and I think it actually gets closer just to the heart of the larger discussions that gun discussion, is that we're often talking about literally two different things, right? Conservatives are talking about that oftentimes, saying oh yes, right to defend against a government, right? And everyone else is saying, I don't want my children to be gunned down in the streets. So you can respond to that.
Yeah, so there's a utilitarian calculus that's basically being made here that I take fairly seriously, which is basically what happens if it all goes fucking sideways? That's basically the question that I ask myself. I think that's a question that a lot of conservatives ask themselves, and it appeals to motivated reasoning. I think Drew Welty and Lehman have talked to this previously. And I understand that you view your world as more pragmatic, but for me, as somebody who studies history really closely, I think that there's just a whole host of scenarios that I could come up with that might be anecdotal, but you would absolutely not be comfortable with. During the age of like Reconstruction, during the early 20th century, we obviously had the KKK and lynch mobs, and we also had racist police who were in charge of certain counties. So under your model, during that exact historical time frame, a racist sheriff could say, hey, Prime, you don't have the right to keep a firearm because I can't think of a single justifiable reason for you to have one. And as a result, you are now at the mercy of the militia or the KKK as a result. I, on the other hand, would basically be saying like, hey, Prime's a U.S. citizen. He deserves the right to keep and defend arms inside his home. He can defend it again, or he can defend himself not just against people that are illegally trying to hurt him, but if the government does something, let's say under color of law, a sheriff's deputy shows up and you basically know that when he shows up, people get killed. You can fucking kill him too, as long as you can prove it that he's basically using under color of law, basically to murder people. But just to do the olive branch, basically, I think there's plenty that we can do. I think American gun culture is fucking disgusting. I think it's sick. I think there's so much shit that we can do when it comes to basically promoting safe storage, promoting proper gun safety. The reason why Sprouticus was able to talk about like gun safety rules, like just ad hoc, like he was literally just able to cite them out of his mouth, is because they've been fucking beat into him. I like talking about responsibilities along with rights, and I think Americans are fucking terrible at it. So the right to keep and bear arms should come with the responsibility to know what the fuck you're talking about. It should come with the responsibility for safe storage. It should come with the responsibility of knowing the safety rules. It should come with the responsibility of proper weapons handling. And I think I'll leave it here, but basically I think there's a lot of things that you and I would agree with that wouldn't feel like a philosophical violation to you, and wouldn't feel like a philosophical violation to me, that would reduce the amount of people who are getting hurt and killed in our communities.
So I would say that there are a lot more race riots and massacres of African Americans throughout the past by whites than the Tulsa massacre, and those people were armed, and that didn't stop it. In fact, that encouraged. But that encouraged, literally, that helped encourage white violence. So, like, I'm just saying.
But do you think the alternative would have been better?
Hold on. But the point is, the point that you've made, and that everyone makes, is that, well, just having these guns is going to be the thing that protects or deters. But it doesn't seem to do that. Like, there are plenty of massacres, and we don't talk about them in history because, well, white people find it inconvenient, right? But all the series of massacres that's happened all across the U.S., those people had guns too. They were armed, and it failed nonetheless, right?
Well, at least they had a fighting chance.
They died, by the hundreds.
Well,
I would rather die armed than
literally by
unarmed.
The hundreds sometimes.
I would rather die free than live a slave.
Fuck that.
Okay, please don't throw that around, that nonsense. I'll live as a slave from people who are actually enslaved, right? Like, okay, thank you. That's nice, buddy. But like, history has shown, it just hasn't been the protection. It just like
but I have
the results. But like, looking at the actual results, you can keep saying that. But like, looking at the actual results, when people were armed and it didn't save them.
But I've had this conversation. I literally had this conversation last night. So excuse me, but there are very cool people in history, such as Harriet Tubman, who literally armed herself, taught herself how to shoot, ran the fucking Underground Railroad, helped slaves escape. And I am sure that every single fucking slave that she helped escape, that was important. Now, was she like a macroscopic, like fucking policy that helped like free the slaves? No, she wasn't. But on the microscopic level, she was able to impose a certain level of moral justice on her own level because she exercised her right to self-defense, even when the country, the Confederacy that she was a part of, said that she doesn't have the ability to do so. Also, I would have to Google him in order to look up his fucking name, but there's also an incredibly badass fucking slave that captured a Confederate gunboat, flew like the correct flags in order to communicate with Confederate ships that he was a friendly, escaped to the fucking North, made it to the North, fought in the fucking Union, and then became a business owner afterwards and like died happy and fucking retired at the age of 60. So I understand, like, history is replete with examples of like fucked up shit. But the reason why history is so interesting is because there's these microscopic examples of people who do incredibly interesting shit that feels more moral, more justified, more in line with the ideals that we speak to. And these people should be our fucking heroes. So I wouldn't tell Harriet Tubman, you don't have the right to resist. You don't have the right to fucking keep and bear arms. I would say, Harriet Tubman, fucking go shoot that motherfucker if he's coming at you, after you. Same thing with that escaped slave.
Those are literally one-offs because like it went well for them, but do you know how many people that were armed, how many like different like slave rebellions that were armed and like were not successful just because of the arming? Like
but this
are,
is
like one-off situations.
This is the moral question that I would ask you. Is it better to be armed and to fight for what you believe in, whether that's freedom, autonomy, self-determination, whatever the fuck you believe in, right? Is it better to be armed and to fight and die for a cause you believe in, or to be cowed into a corner and basically subject to the violence of the state? That's the question. And basically, like, this is something that, like, fundamentally, like, when we talk about freedom, like liberty from government, conservatives and libertarians basically believe that your freedom only starts when you assert it, when you say that you have it. If you don't say that you have it, it doesn't fucking exist. So if the federal government comes out and they say, we passed the Patriot Act, you're a domestic terrorist, you're not allowed to own assault weapons, if you're pro-constitutionalist, you're a fucking piece of shit, and you need to be cowed into the corner and basically eliminated from history. Me and people like me say, fuck that shit. We know the principles that this country was founded on. We believe in the principles that this country was founded on. And on top of that, we're willing to die to make sure that those principles propagate and continue into the next generation. And we would rather die free and fighting for what we believe in than be cowed into a safe corner. I would rather be dead than in the CCP. I would rather be dead than in Nazi Germany.
This seems so disgusting to me because it sounds like.
Why the fuck does this sound disgusting to you?
I'm going to explain why. Do you think I just said that and all I was going to say in isolation?
No, I just think it's fucking obnoxious that you said it was disgusting.
Great, let me explain why. Jesus
okay.
Christ. Lord have mercy. It sounds like you're being an opportunist and using the same.
Why?
Used by slaves, like that had nothing to do with gun reform, and you're trying to misappropriate this phrase for your own ends right now. That's why it sounds disgusting. Does that not sound like an accurate thing of accurate representation of what's happening right now?
No, I think all human beings have the right to self-defense, including slaves. I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
That has nothing to do with the point of you misusing a quote, misappropriating it to fight for your cause, but it had nothing to do with gun reform. It had nothing to do with the ability to own guns. That's not what this thing was about. It's
everything that I've said for the past fucking 10 minutes is precisely why balance of power politics exists. I have no idea what you're taking issue with.
Counterpoints. I think he's taking. I think he's taking issue with me saying I think he's taking issue with the same thing Prime took issue to. That I brought up the quote. I'd rather die free than live a slave. And that was from the revolution, and I brought it up because that is the mindset the founding fathers had
from people who enslaved others. Let's
oh
make
yes,
sure.
I would love to know the founding fathers.
I can't even finish.
That's fine, but tell us more about that. Right, from slaveholders, right, talking about freedom, in terms of like dying on their feet rather than living as a slave. As they went when they went back to the plantations and beat people to death. Please tell me more about that.
Do you think I will fucking tell you about it.
I was talking to Sprout, but you know,
very convenient, but okay.
I was talking to Sprout. He was on fucking talking. Well, let me convenient.
All right,
I can go. We can go to you later. Don't worry, we can handle you too.
All right,
Sprout.
So I don't think slavery is moral whatsoever. I've consistently gone after the founding fathers for that. I've consistently said that they were wrong for having slavery. There was, if you actually look in the Federalist Papers, there was discussion with it. The founding fathers didn't all agree on slavery, like people try and make it out to be. Not all the founding fathers agreed that slaves should exist. There was discussion on that, whether or not slaves should exist in this new country. Eventually it came to a conclusion that it's going to end up in a war. But I'm against slavery. I don't know why I'm being attributed that I'm pro-slavery.
Who said that? Stop right there. Who said that? Who? Which one? Which one of us said that? Which one?
Well, you're bringing the attribution with what you're saying, Prime.
No. You're doing this thing that conservatives do all the time, right? And doing the whole victim blaming thing. Like what? Literally, no one said that. Not one of us implied that. I would never imply that. I don't think that of you. Katarana, why would she imply that to you? Why would a fanatic apply it? No one has said that to you. No one. But you just assumed that it was, right? Like, oh, I'm being attacked on something that has to do with slavery, so it must mean they think that I'm pro-slavery. None of us said that. None of us even applied it. No one was thinking that. So you can
I'm glad. Okay. I'm glad no one implied it. And no one was thinking that. I've not been so lucky in the past. With that being said, I used that quote because that was their thought process when they made the Second Amendment. That was a very short and concise quote that I could just pull out, and it was their thought process when making the Second Amendment. And it's why the Second Amendment exists today. I'm against gun control. Gun control started off as being racist because the racists in government didn't want the colored citizens to have weapons. That's originally why they came out with gun control. I'm against gun control. I think that we should teach people the responsible way to carry and the responsible way to have firearms, and I think we'd be a much safer community for it.
Okay.
Yeah, listen, I gotta say, it's a little cringe to attribute that claim to founding fathers who were slave owners disproportionately. That was actually a quote by Frederick Douglass, the famous freed slave. I'd rather it's better to die free.
He's still considered a founding father, but okay.
Frederick Douglass not considered a founding
No,
father.
he's not.
Okay, so who was it that said it? Who was it that said it?
Frederick Douglass said the quote, "It's better to die free than live as a slave."
Do you know what color Frederick Douglass is?
No, I know what color he is. No,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about someone else.
Uh-huh.
May I?
That's bad. So no, it was someone that was being hung, and okay, maybe I pulled the wrong quote, but I'm still okay. There's a quote extremely similar to that, and it's from a founding father before they got hung.
Okay, no. So the quote you're probably thinking about is probably like "live free or die," which is it's a one that comes from the French Revolution, right?
Or the true
either way,
one of the others. But okay.
Either way, there's a lot of quotes.
Let's go to shadows and then counterpoints.
Yeah, so Spartacus actually got to this before I could mention it, but since Connor brought it up and, brought up the KKK, it is very important to understand that, when it comes to, usurpacious governments and denying rights from people, in the majority opinion from Dred Scott, the right to bear arms was an issue mentioned in that they did not want to consider, the black man. Of course, they did not use the word black at the time, but I'm going to be politically correct. They did not want to give the black man the right to have bear arms. And also, of course, the first ever state level gun control in this country was in southern states because it's obviously going to be easier to terrorize an unarmed population than an armed one. So yeah, and then also a better quote, I think I think to use here would be the African proverb: "It is better to live 1 year as a lion than 100 years as a sheep." So
okay.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
All right. So basically, it doesn't. I don't give a fuck. Again, this is kind of like getting back to our history point earlier from fucking Kobe. If something was said 1900 years ago, but the concept still bears fruit, and the solution that they basically propose still has a purpose in the real world today, then I still think that is an interesting concept. So I don't give a fuck if it's some racist fucking dickhead in fucking 1812 talking about how a 3% fucking 3% tax on fucking tea was akin to fucking chattel slavery, or if it was Frederick fucking Douglass post fucking Civil War saying like, no, like this is legitimately something that we should have fucking fought for. If the idea is true, the idea is true. So the way that free societies, Fanatic, you can fucking come at me. I have no idea why I'm saying if a fucking idea is true, regardless of source, it's fucking true. That should not be a contentious fucking point. So I have no idea.
It's missing the point. It's because you're literally
tell me the fucking point.
I explained it already, but apparently
do it
you weren't
again.
listening. I will do it again. It's the idea of misappropriating a phrase that is at the center of the heart of many people that are still living under systemic oppression today, and misusing that quote to try to misappropriate it for your stupid gun idea is ridiculous. It's dismissive. It's offensive, and I've explained it enough, but you just don't want to hear it because you don't care.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, you're right. I don't fucking care. The reason why I don't fucking care. No, fuck you. All right, buddy. Fuck you. No, because the fucking fight of free people is not exclusive to fucking black people throughout history. Get the fuck out of here. You want to?
No one ever said that either, you idiot. No one said that. Only slaves were free to fight for something.
This is
I
bullshit.
think this quote had a direct
This seems like productive discourse.
It's literally named in it. It literally says die as a slave. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
This isn't just a general quote. It had a very specific usage, a very specific meaning that you are misappropriating.
And let Connor respond, please.
Okay, that fanatic. This is the reason why I don't give a fuck about this goddamn perspective. You are not the only fucking person throughout history who has oppression in your fucking history. You are not the only person who has talked about fucking history, freedom or the balance of liberty or the balance of power or fucking anything. This is a universal fucking human struggle. So to get fucking butthurt that I'm taking one of your great heroes, quoting him and saying that it's relevant to the fucking human condition is literally like, it's weird fucking policing. And Kobe agreeing with you is also fucking weird to me. Guess what?
Yeah,
there's been plenty of fucked up shit throughout history. You don't have a monopoly on fucked up shit, okay? So don't fucking get butthurt over fucking concepts that universally apply to humanity. Get the fuck out of here.
No. It doesn't universally apply. Because it's
I'm done. I'm done.
The quote. I know you're done. You were done the second you said that stupid thing, and everybody in the chat.
Because that's stupid. You're full of shit.
You were done the second you all lives matter this situation, and tried to imply that we've all experienced the same type of oppression. This direct quote talking about slavery somehow it applies to everyone. Everyone here has experienced it, right? Yeah, you're an idiot, and it shows.
All right. Well,
that's not even what I said, and you can go fuck yourself, buddy.
All right.
Everyone here heard it.
Omni, could
fuck you.
Wait, can I actually
respond, and then
all I want to say is my perspective.
What I was just gonna say.
I'm just gonna briefly, sorry, because I brought up. I'm sorry. My perspective on this is that I think that I don't think that at all Fanatic ever implied that black people are the only people that experience oppression or even just slavery in general. We're specifically talking about whether or not it's appropriate to accidentally misattribute a quote by one of the most accomplished freed slaves in America to people that owned black people. That I feel like is the contention in that thing there. That would be my
I never even made any attribution.
I know, not to you. That would not to you. That was where we started talking about the quote in general. I think that's incredibly important to bring up, right?
So Omni, I'm gonna go to you. But there's no reason to introduce the market into whatever you're about to say. So I plead.
Well, I mean, what I was just gonna say is this getting
fuck
element of politics where it's just sort of a shouting match of people emoting at each other, which I think should we move to another topic on this?
I'll decide that. Don't worry.
This is content, baby.
Yeah,
it's not even.
But,
all right, so
we didn't get to the heart of the thing that I was discussing with Connor in which way, right?
If you want to get to it, I'm fucking down. But
okay.
I don't think I've made any fucking. I don't think I've said a single fucking thing that I couldn't defend right now.
Sure. Okay. Whatever. But my point being that the two sides of this again are talking about two different things, two different arguments, right? We're talking about keeping our communities safe, right? It seems in the conservative mind, keeping communities safe is from the government, right? And it's not as if the African Americans don't understand the government being a threat. I mean, we have the police, and they're a threat. So we understand that concept, but at the same time, going back to the whether guns can protect African Americans, sure. Well, I guess then we can start attacking cops then, right? And see how far that gets us. So that's the actual threat in our neighborhoods right now. Well, one of them is our police, right? No, hold on, no. The police are actually can actually be a threat. There's crime too. Yes, I get that. There's other crime too. But the police can actually be a fucking threat within our neighborhoods. But using that right against those weapons against the tyrannical state, right, won't get us very far. I think you can acknowledge that too. So when we talk about keeping our community safe, we're talking about the massive amount of crime and the easy access to gun that criminals have, right? So go ahead.
Sure. So, okay. So for me, what I would be infinitely more interested in, because this is like brought up in the context of Chicago, right? There's like immediately across the border in Indiana, there's like precipitously less gun violence. Okay. So the access to firearms, while real and compared to Western European countries, is a variable in whether or not gun violence or violence in general exists. It's clear that you can basically change some of the variables in the material conditions in order to reduce gun violence that have nothing to do with removing firearms from law-abiding citizens. So what I would say, what my pro-leftist argument would be, is that there's been systemic inequality, systemic racism, like historically, like blacks and people of color and brown people in general have been fucked over in this country, okay? That's just undeniable. But if we were to look at a way to reduce violence overall as an intergenerational project, then what we would do as a fucking gun dumb fuck, I guess, is I would want to work on you with things that you would probably agree with. Universal pre-K, high quality education, improving job opportunities, universal secondary education, reducing recidivism, education in prisons, prison reform, moving from a punitive model to a rehabilitative model. There are so many things that we could do. Removing felony as a lifetime record. Basically, like after 2 years or whatever amount of fucking penance that you do after you get out, you basically the term felon is removed from your record. That way you can be gainfully employed in a normal situation. That way people can actually see a light at the end of the tunnel rather than two options, which is basically being a permanent felon and working at fucking Taco Bell or fucking slinging weed on the fucking street corner. So there are so many things that we could do that would actually like bring down violence and improve people's lives that has nothing to do with taking away firearms.
Great. 100%. Love it, right? All the things that the left has actually already been working on and the right has been obstructionist to. I agree. Let's dismantle the conservative project, and then maybe we can move forward in society. No. Let's dismantle the entire conservative project, and then we'll actually have some movement on any of these things. Great. But while we're waiting for that, while we're waiting for all those things to happen, those great things that, again, that people like me, people like Maddie, right, are fighting for, right? We have to. We still have neighborhoods, right, that are filled with crime. We still have mass shootings happening. We still have domestic abusers, right, having access to weapons and using that against their partners. We have all those things are happening right this second, right? So now, if we could change the world immediately and apply that, then I would take a second look at this argument. Like, well, do we really need to get rid of guns, right? Looking at our utopia's crime statistics, right? Then maybe I'd be with you. But right now, we don't have that.
Okay, the reason why I come onto lefty shows in general, and the reason why I feel comfortable, screaming at people, is because I'm trying to get other people who are of completely different political persuasions to understand my perspective. And not only that, how they can sell their politics in a specific way that actually appeals to people like me. People who are libertarian, raised conservative, raised social conservative, raised Christian conservative, and all that kind of stuff. And if you wanted to take better schools, better education, better social programs, all that kind of stuff, then you have to appeal to what's called motivated reasoning. This is something that Drew Welty talks about. This is something that Layman talks about all the time. You basically have to take your policy and repackage it into a conservative list. And the way that you do that, specifically with all of the policies that I was talking about, where we're talking about like education reform, ooh, sounds expensive. Universal pre-K, ooh, sounds expensive. So universal secondary education, ooh, sounds expensive. Do we have the money for it? That's the conservative instinct, right? But what you can say is, hey, Republicans have been fucking you in the ass for the past 30 years. They've been telling you that universal pre-K, which costs $26 billion a year, is not financially feasible while spending $48 billion a year in Afghanistan without even blinking. Republicans are telling you that secondary and trade vocational education is not financially accessible, but at the same time, they've been spending $48 fucking billion a year in Afghanistan without fucking blinking. Both of these are tenable things that will have immediate impact on people's lives, that will significantly improve. And don't say the material conditions, because they're going to know your economy, right? What you do say is you say improve American families, because there is nothing that gives a conservative a fucking rock hard boner like monogamy, traditional marriage, and little fucking children running around in fucking quarter acre fucking 1,400 square foot houses. So if you sell them the fantasy of America supported by these fucking programs, you can sell it to the people that you need bipartisan support from.
Except that we have another side that's been scaremongering on exactly the opposite the entire time. Again, the conservative project.
Then let's beat those cunts up together, Prime. You and I can do it.
You and I.
We can do it.
Connor, right? No, because, yeah, look, I'm sure I know that you and I have vast amounts of agreement, right? And you and I can do this. But the conservative project as a whole, right? They simply are not partners in this. In fact, they are the obstruction. They are the reason why all these things haven't happened. Exactly that, right? So, since we can't rely on them as a partner, right? And simply waiting for these things to happen, right? Seems untenable because there are lives lost. Why not put gun legislation in place that can help lessen these actual deaths that are happening now? Because those lives, right? Those people, those bullets don't wait around. They don't slow down. Oh, there's legislation might be coming down the pike. Poverty might be going down soon, right? So I won't go through this child. So I don't.
Okay, so one of my personal icons, who was a racist, by the way, is Teddy Roosevelt. Okay, he was a progressive Republican. And what he did, which I think people need to work up some fucking nutsack and do, is they need to bully their fucking political peers. Okay, so I'm perfectly comfortable bullying my political peers in order to push for policies that I believe in. Not only that, you have to start incrementally and small. All right, I talked to my local representative last week. We were talking about field social workers, which the Orlando Police Department is already doing. Orange County Sheriff's Office is not doing it. She asked me to make contact with the Orange County Sheriff's Office and see if I can bully the sheriff into doing it as a Republican, as a centrist, as a whatever, in order to get field social workers in the program, because she said that if I get the sheriff to agree to the program, which she's already approached him about multiple times, then she will pay for it through state funds. So I understand that when people are dying tomorrow, it's hard to want to focus on a 5 or 10 year solution. But what I'm saying is every single thing in a democracy is going to take 5 to 10 years, and we have to start now.
Agreed. Okay, so I will move on. We'll move on to the next subject. But I would just say the progressives had started decades ago, and who was in the way? Conservatives the entire time. Of course, right? Like it's not like we haven't been working for those exact prescriptions. That's been our project. That's been our goal. But once again,
but you suck at rhetoric. That's where I come in.
Or the conservatives suck at understanding that they are fighting against their own interests, right? Are easily demagogued against. Maybe that's the problem. I don't know, right? And once again, waiting for them to understand that that their interests are at odds with whatever their politicians or whatever fucking Trump is saying, right? Like while we're waiting for them to do that, right? To understand these simple concepts, people are dying. So I don't know, but I guess we just
final point. You're a socialist, and I don't believe that socialism is in my personal interest. But we can work together on other stuff.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next topic. But thank you for engaging with me on that. I appreciate it. Next topic. All right. Topic 2. The ACLU is in the midst of an upheaval. There is a split as to whether the organization should expand its operations into fighting for progressive ideals such as racial equality or immigrant defense, or stick with its original core mission, which was to defend free speech, no matter what the content. Do you think the ACLU should stick to being the premier free speech advocate, even for people who spew hateful rhetoric? Or do you think it makes sense for a leftward shift in which they fight for equality for all? Okay, and thank you for the last topic for counterpoints, and thank you for this topic for Kobe. Very much appreciate it. Kobe, actually, why don't you get us started and we'll work our way around.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I actually wanted to. So the ACLU is something that I feel like it just kind of pops up a lot of stuff I'm interested in. They, for those of you who don't know, the American Civil Liberties Union is a union of lawyers that work to defend free speech cases, and they historically have been completely nonpartisan. They've defended Nazis. They were created to defend communists and labor organizers against the first Red Scare. They've defended the Nation of Islam. They defended the Black Panther Party. They defended they helped defend the Chicago Six. But they've also, like I said, they defended Nazis. They defended white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, all these kinds of things. In the Trump era, there was a lot of people who joined the organization and a lot of shifting opinions within the organization about the role of the organization, and many people felt that they had been perhaps enabling some of the rise of far right and ultranationalism that we saw in the Trump era and during the Tea Party years. To give my perspective on this, I believe that it is incredibly important for there to be a organization like this. Something that I notice when I read a lot of philosophers that come from other countries, especially from countries in the third world and countries that are a little bit less, they're more like authoritarian than ours, is many argue that our freedom of expression and our heavy free speech laws are one of the very good things about America. There's a lot of bad things about America, but it's one of the good things about America. And I have to agree. I think there are bad sides to it. I think that there are limits to it. We can have that conversation. But I think that having an organization like there's not an organization like this in the Philippines. There's not an organization like this in China. There wasn't like this in the Soviet Union. We have this. We have this power. And I think that it's a little bit short-sighted for people to want to gamble it away, because right now we're seeing a rise of far right. I don't, in the future, what happens, if we have a theocratic government, we no longer have an ACLU that has that power. I'm pretty invested in this. In general, I think this is like a very complicated topic, though. I completely agree. And I think a lot of this should be talking about the boundaries of free speech, which I think is an interesting conversation. So,
Katana. Almost there. Almost there.
Wait, did you call me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. The way that you said it, I thought you said Connor. I'm sorry. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I would have to say that I agree with Kobe. I think if this is a organization that was established for a certain purpose, especially if this is the leading one, going ahead and diverting because your political views don't align seems kind of like short-sighted in terms of being a lawyer. Lawyers commonly have to go ahead and defend things that perhaps they may not agree with, but at the end of the day, if this is a constitutional right, then this should be like part of your pact as a lawyer to go ahead and defend constitutional rights, no matter what like your personal opinion is on it. And I think there's also enough different organizations out there that go ahead and advocate for partisan ideals that we don't need another one to go ahead and shift to that angle. I think having an organization that unanimously will go ahead and defend like your free speech right, no matter what it is something that's really valuable. And I think it seems a bit short-sighted to go ahead and move, because there could always be a shift in which other people join your organization that are of another political like belief, and then from now what, do you shift again? Okay.
Omni.
Yeah, so I think that I think that the ACLU should continue to focus particularly on immigration. Horrendous it's caused by bad
once again,
immigration policy.
your mic.
Sorry.
Please invest in a better mic, please. Just invest in a standalone mic. If you're gonna be streaming, it'll be better, please. But go ahead.
Sorry. So for instance, Swanson found that just allowing just 5% of the people living in poor countries to work temporarily or permanently in richer countries would add trillions of dollars to the global economy, and that the economic gains would be greater than those from dismantling every remaining barrier to trade and investment all around the world. Bahar finds that when we turn our back to people who want to migrate here, it is very often fatal for them.
Yeah,
new migrants make up about 26% of and when people migrate, they become productive as a result of living in a country with better infrastructure. And the ACLU has been at the forefront of every major legal struggle on behalf of immigrants' rights, where it's been focusing on challenging laws that deny immigrants access to the courts, impose indefinite and mandatory detention, and discriminate on the basis of nationality. What has been said by people is that people have stressed the importance of free speech. And I think that that's obviously true, and that free speech is incredibly important. But the question is not, should we get rid of free speech? The question is, at the margins, is it better to focus on one case where a person's free speech rights may be slightly jeopardized, or a case where they can likely do more good by focusing on immigrants' rights? Given the large amount of harm that's coming to immigrants right now. And while it's true that their original purpose was an attempt to protect speech rights. The purpose of an organization can change over time, and it should change if it can do more good.
Fanatic.
Yeah, so I think this phrasing, I don't know. I guess I think it's probably important to note that like the ACLU, like while they did originally champion that, like just the First Amendment, it didn't just stop at just like the basics of free speech. It did go into like some of the more legally nuanced positions, such as separation of church and state. They were also very much in the 40s, I want to say, they started like taking one of, they were absolutely essential to some of the civil rights things that have passed. I think the ACLU, they do just tend to fight for civil rights of various kinds, and some of those civil rights have the predominant one has been free speech. They became like super during the McCarthy era, like super duper anti-communist. So I think the idea that they're abandoning something by doing this, it's just, I don't think it's realistic considering how many times they've shifted focuses just over the history of their existence. So I think, yes, I don't know that they should take a leftist stance, but I think they should continue to fight for civil liberties for people. And I don't know that that's essentially leftist, because I think some of the civil liberties that the people on the right focus on, such as free speech and things, I think are they're just as important.
Counterpoints.
Yeah, so basically I was going to take a more like ship's already fucking sailed. Seems like the ACLU is no longer trusted by the right wing to advocate for their political interest. But Kobe kind of articulated something that I think is incredibly important, which is basically the reason why that perception exists in the first place is just because of how vital and how important it is. So I guess to basically defend speech that you don't like, and also to say that, hey, regardless of how shitty your fucking idea is, as long as you're not hurting or killing anybody, you have the right to articulate it in public. So, if I guess my more strict stance or my more strict stance is that if the ACLU chooses to abandon or significantly reduce its desire to defend bad free speech, then somebody has to fill that void. I can remember when I was coming up, the thing that was particularly disgusting that it got a rise out of me was I think it was like the Phelps Church or something like that. They were the people who were protesting the Iraq War by going to service members' funerals and then basically hanging anti-LGBTQ stuff at those funerals. And also, if they found out that the soldier was LGBTQ, they still they still had like even grosser signs about where that person was and what they were doing. I think that being said, maybe there's some nuance there for the limits of free speech that I would be interested in discussing, because I don't think a family member who's mourning their lost one deserve to be harassed. So maybe we could talk about that as a specific example once we get into the general. But if the ACLU isn't going to take this fight on, somebody needs to take their place because it is important.
Maddie. And Maddie, you're glowing as usual.
Thank you. Also, can I just say that I love the pronoun situation in everyone's names right now. Like Mr. Fanatic has it, Sprouticus, Shadows, just like A+, guys. Great work. So I think it's probably a good thing and kind of a natural shift for the ACLU to focus on cases that extend beyond protecting free speech. I think if you look at the political climate right now, if you look at sort of the environment that our country's in right now, a lot of the work they've done, I think Omni alluded to this, but they've done a lot to protect the rights of people trying to immigrate into this country. They were instrumental in fighting against the Muslim ban by the Trump administration. So as these like civil liberties and these laws that are really seeking to target people who are marginalized and who are oppressed by the government and society, what the ACLU is doing is seeing that their value can extend beyond just advocating for free speech. And I don't necessarily think that free speech protections and fighting in the courts to preserve freedom of speech is going to go away. I just think that maybe as this country has evolved over time, so have the aims and focuses of different organizations that look to protect citizens. And this seems like a natural transition for the ACLU to make. So that's sort of my position on it. But I do think there is some discussion to be had on just how much that shift should, like, what other things they should be focusing on, and whether or not that's going to impact when they are defending free speech for maybe some groups that don't align with progressive causes, because that is something that they've historically done. So I think there's some interesting dialogue to be had there.
Okay, great. Shadows.
First of all, I'm glad Maddie acknowledged it. I think it's unfair that Kobe's aren't acknowledged. Hey, Lois, look, I'm on a Twitch panel. Hey. Anyways.
Please do not. Please do not make fun of my accent. Okay, that's very rude. Okay, it's very rude for you to do that.
I'm sorry. Anyways, I think the ACLU can shift its focus if they want to. I think their history will always be with that. Like we've pointed out, they've defended the Chicago Six, but they've also defended Nazis marching in Skokie, both of which have coincided in changes in membership. I'm sure you can tell which one was up and down based on it. There are, of course, other groups that do free speech. I think the ACLU is probably going to naturally shift left if they continue to nationally, fight against heartbeat bills and whatnot and abortion laws, which I think is a very important civil liberty. It is probably the most hot button civil liberty. And I think it's very important that they protect that. So as they protect that, they will shift leftward. I think their history will always be with free speech, but I think a lot of people who, feel like they need to fight for free speech, at least on the right, are, I think they have the ADF with them. I think that is probably a group that better represents their views. So I'm totally fine with them, having the ADF defend them rather than the ACLU. And I, of course, want them to defend important civil liberties of immigrants and women and whatnot. So, yeah.
Sprout.
You're muted, Sprout.
What? ACLU
Awesome.
didn't defend his free speech, and so there was
pro
a
screen
strong
remove.
Yeah.
The conservatives always the one muted, right?
Mm.
But I'm glad I get to kick us off into open. So I think the ACLU should be able to take on more than just free speech. I feel like they should fight for their human rights, right? So human natural rights. I believe the ACLU should fight for each and every single one of them. And I believe the ACLU is capable of doing that while also protecting free speech. But while I talk about free speech, like people have been saying, they protected Nazis, they protected a wide amount of people, just narrow it down to like two groups, but it's a little bit disingenuous. But they protected a wide amount of people from all sides of the political spectrum, and from disgusting sides to this person is a fantastic person, and I don't know why anyone would even go after this person. But to quote someone, Larry Flint, and if you're not 100% sure on who Larry Flint is, he was the owner and he produced a magazine called Hustler, which was a competitor to Playboy. But to quote Larry Flint, he said, "Freedom of speech doesn't protect speech you like. It protects speech you don't like." No one understands the First Amendment is only important if you are going to offend somebody. If you're not going to offend somebody, you don't need protection of the First Amendment. You have to be able to be tolerable of what you don't necessarily like so you can be free. And a democracy can't exist without free speech, the right to assemble. That's what Americans tend to forget. And they're born into a culture where they can take all of these freedoms for granted. And that's where I'll yield to open.
Okay, let's start with Kobe, then
for sure.
Shadows, and then Omni. Yeah.
So it seems like there's kind of like two lines of a conversation that we can go down. I think both of them are actually like almost equally as interesting. But I'm sorry, I actually should have made when I wrote the question, I should have focused it a little bit better in the direction I wanted to take. So just to put this in conversation to a little bit more context, the ACLU saw like a massive rise in funding during the Trump years, and actually what everybody is talking here, they actually did exactly this. They started focusing on other types of civil liberties or funding, and they've always done this, right? But funding these other things. The specific conversation within the ACLU is, within the branch that is defending freedom of speech, should they even defend someone like a Nazi, a KKK member? that's the conversation. There are some folks in the organization that feel that they should continue to defend the free speech, but they should defend the free speech of causes that would, I guess, more aligned with, I guess, I don't know, I don't want to say, progressivism, whatever you want to say. So I'm interested. I'm a little more interested in that direction. But the other conversation of, is it, well, the other kind of two, which is that what other kind of civil liberty should the ACLU be focusing on? Is it good that the ACLU kind of this change is natural? I think that's very interesting. And the other is, which I'd be interested to see, is the idea of a nonpartisan civil liberties union in general. Is this a good idea in general? I would say very much yes, but I'd be very curious. So sorry, I just want to clarify there.
Okay, so we'll go to Shadows, Omni, Katarana, and then Sprout and Counter.
I was gonna make a point about that freedom thing, and I think it's something important to acknowledge when it comes to social freedoms. But I think one of my mods mentioned democracies can't exist without free speech. Has this man heard of a place called Europe? Which I think is kind of a fair point, because they have free speech. They have room for dissent. But there's a lot of hateful things that you can't say. See Exhibit A, Count Dankula. That was, pretty fucked up, but he got arrested for that. To be fair, Scottish police don't really have that much else to do. So, but yeah, it's just important to acknowledge that, we need to, that is what free speech is. It's for hateful and kind of fucked up shit. If you're going to say something that doesn't have some degree of offense or dissent, then you probably don't need that protection. That is what that's for. It's for dissent against the government and dissent against, the common public. So.
Okay. Let's go to Omni, Katarana, Sprout, Counter.
I think that the specific things the ACLU is focusing on demonstrates why it's more important to focus on things like immigration policy than on things like free speech. Now, the claim is not that immigration is more important than free speech as a whole, obviously, but the claim is just that if the ACLU is going to be investing 10 lawyers and $1 million in a college, it's better to spend it on immigration. Because if they spend it on free speech, as counterpoints brought up, they'll be doing things like defending the Phelps Church. Now, I think that the Phelps Church, probably should have the right to say what they want. There are certain harassment considerations, but that's definitely very much an edge case. But if they're doing immigration things, it is, people being deported, causing massive amounts of violence, children in cages, which is just the marginal case with immigration. It's just a substantial amount worse than the marginal case relating to free speech. The last point I would raise is Sprouticus brought up this idea of natural rights. I think that the idea of natural rights is very stupid. I think that rights are legal fictions. We have this. So what we do is we construct these rights because they're useful legally. Given that society goes best when we have things like the right to life, the right to property, but natural rights are no more real than innocent until proven guilty. There's no sense in which you are actually innocent until proven guilty, but it is useful practically for the law to treat you as innocent until proven guilty. And so I think that rights are the same type of thing. And if you disagree, I would ask you, give me a way to determine what types of things should be rights, and B, explain why everything that we think of as right seems to be reducible to a heuristic that generates good consequences in the long run.
Okay, let's go to. Oh, sorry. I had a list. One second. Katarana, Sprout, Counter, please.
Cool. So I don't really think that it's necessarily relevant to say like whether or not the ACLU should go ahead and spend time working on free speech or not, and like the cost benefit analysis, because like no matter what, as Kobe went ahead and redirected, like they are going to be working on free speech. Now the question is more of whether or not they should be working on free speech for people that majority of us would consider to be abhorrent people or not. And if we're going to go ahead and work within that framework, I would say that no matter what, even if it paying people to go ahead and do it. That is, as I initially stated, point of as part of being a lawyer. People continuously have to go ahead and defend people that they don't necessarily agree with. Somebody had to defend Ted Bundy, and somebody's going to have to defend the Nazis. Now, do I say at the end of the day that like I really agree a lot with their ideologies? No, but is it illegal for them to do it? No, it's not illegal to have bad ideas, because obviously if they were going into people's neighborhoods and like threatening them, that is a crime. If they're going and just spreading bad ideas, that in itself is not a crime, especially if it's not calling to go ahead and say, or like calling to threat. If it's not insurrection level speech, then they should be able to disseminate their ideas. It just means that is on the onus of like private corporations to say, yes, we don't want this on our platforms, and that's completely fine, but they're allowed to say it into the abyss, and that's something that we have to defend, because it, like, at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to do it. ACLU is its own organization. I can't stipulate to them whether or not they should do it. But at the end of the day, if they've gone ahead and established themselves as being the nonpartisan organization that goes ahead and covers free speech, then I think that if that's what they're known for, then they should continue with that. Because honestly, it's just, I feel a bit emotional whiplash for the public to also just expect that this is going to be a service that they provide, and then for them to go ahead and change, especially as a nonprofit that people have donated to on the expectation that they would defend all types of speech. So I know I'm not a stakeholder or I'm not a donor of the ACLU, but I would say that I think everybody's civil liberties need to be covered, no matter how shitty of a person you are.
Oh boy, we're gonna have a fight. So let's go. Sorry, I keep taking the list down. The next person is Sprout and Counter. And then,
so
go ahead, please.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, so Kobe, I think the original intent of Kobe's question was, should the ACLU continue to be basically nonpartisan and protect whoever it is that needs protected in the court of law and a free speech? My argument is yes. I think, and the church you guys are referring to is Westboro Baptist Church. I just wanted to make that very clear. That's the church you're referring to is Westboro. And so there are harassment charges. Like, you can get charged for harassment. You can get charged for causing a panic. You can get charged for causing a riot. Those are outside of the realm of free speech. Free speech is that you should be able to say your thoughts without government intervention. So the government shouldn't be able to put you in jail because you said your thoughts, right? So I can say I'm not going to say it on stream. So, but anyways, you can say something completely abhorrent. Just like, for an example, a much calmer version is I can't go into a street and say, let's start a riot. But I can say, I think a riot would be appropriate in this situation. There's a huge difference between saying let's start a riot and provoking that than saying I think a riot would be appropriate in this situation. One's provoking it, the other one is not. And I think that the ACLU should, I think they've got enough manpower, enough money to where they can go with other civil liberties. But I think the ACLU should remain to be bipartisan. And Omni, I don't know where you're getting this, but you reached the brilliance of the Constitution, right? You reach the brilliance. The first 10 are called the Bill of Rights, right? And so the brilliance of the founding fathers was that these rights were given to us by God, so that if they were given to us by a power that is above the government, therefore the government can never take away those rights. So if the government didn't give us those rights, they can't be taken away. It's the absolute brilliance of the Constitution. That's what you reached right there, and that's where I'll yield.
Okay, let's get a Counter, and then I'm going to respond to them both, and then Omni and Fanatic.
Okay, hold on. I'll give you something easier to respond to, buddy. Like, as an agnostic deist, I would call some of these natural rights rather than I understand God-given. But for me, I would say natural, just because like the right to conscience, nobody can really take that away. They can kill you for expressing it, but they can't take that away. Same thing with self-defense, all that kind of stuff. How do we create like a better functioning society based off of these ideas? But I've really been fucking sold over the past like 2 minutes that it's basically nefarious people who need at least one major case per year to be publicly defended, because we kind of have to like refresh this civic virtue. We have to refresh the civic virtue like on an annual basis, saying like, I fucking hate the Westboro Baptist Church. I think they're nefarious. I hate their ideology. I hate the way they express it. I think they're pieces of shit. Basically, if they were in the room with me, it would be super hard for me not to like take physical action. They're the worst people imaginable. And yet we have a institution in our country that specifically defends their right to do this shit in a way that is like the exercising of a public civic virtue. And I think we need that reminder. I think we need that like social reminder that free speech is oftentimes unpopular, that even your worst enemies deserve some level of rights, that people that you find individually despicable deserve some level of like dignity under the law. And I think it's really easy, especially with like the politically tribal nature of our modern politics, to be like, nah, fuck those people. They're evil pieces of shit. I think they should all be dead. Like, I think that's a really easy thing to say in our current political climate. I think if the ACLU was in the news more prevalently, basically defending pieces of shit and doing the right thing, regardless of their personal feelings about it, I think that's a powerful message.
Okay, so next on the list is Omni, Fnatic, and Kobe. But before that, I'm going to respond to Counter and Katarana, because hate speech is absolutely a threat, right? So, like, Counterpoints made this point talking about how, oh, you know, you can make this hate speech as long as you're not hurting anyone, as if those two things are not mutually inclusive, right? These things are absolutely tied together, right? If you the classic example is ACLU defending like the KKK marching through a Jewish neighborhood, right? Sure, they may not have attacked anyone and they may not have called for violence, but that was a threat. That was a threat to those individuals there. They felt that. They were more frightened than they were before. They were less safe in their own neighborhoods, in their own country than they were previously.
Hey, as
threats, thanks, great. As threats to people of color, right? Like come through the form of hate speech, right? Someone, oh yeah, sure, not making a threat, sure, but just saying that, like, they think that, you know, N-words, right, are quite violent, you know, and something needs to be done about that. No, I'm sure I'm not calling for anything, but something needs to be done because those people are really violent, right? And I just don't want them in my neighborhood, and here they are in my neighborhood. Well, but you're telling me, oh, these things are separate. If these things, that one needs to be defended, right? I'm sure. Well, the fact that should they have lawyers within our system, like a police system, sure, fine, whatever, right? But should that be covered under free speech? Why? Why? Certainly, why should I ever defend them? That's why I used to do this whole free speech absolute thing as well, right? That used to be my mindset, and then I realized no, the most of the people, not all of them, but most of the people who've been pushing that are the ones who aren't the ones who suffer the brutality that comes from that hate speech, right? When it actively makes your neighborhoods, your lives, your livelihoods, your nation less safe for you and people who look like you or who people worship like you to be free. So okay, so we'll go.
Could I just like one sentence? Free. This is not like free speech absolutism, because that would include, say, threats of violence or things like this. This is like just like a broad free speech approach. So I just want to make that distinction. Okay. I think free speech absolutism is like way more unreasonable than what like I'm or Katarina is arguing.
Okay, fair enough. Omni, Fnatic, Kobe. Counter.
I think that Straticus missed the point about natural rights. So I was giving a substantive rights. There were sort of two tests I gave for like two arguments I gave, neither of which were responded to. One is if everything that we think about as a right seems to be a heuristic for generating good consequences, explain that if they're God-given. Second, give me a criterion for how we determine if something right other than just you feeling like something is right. But two more sort of arguments against rights are, one, there's I think a pretty compelling reductio, which is suppose that I fall out of a plane with a parachute and I'm like hanging on a hotel, where I didn't ask them beforehand if I could hang off the edge of the hotel, and they say you cannot use our window ledge for that. Do I have to like let go and die? That seems pretty counterintuitive. And finally, I mean, the things that we think of as rights are just so arbitrary. So there are a lot of things that we can do with property, and then there are a lot of things that we can't do with property. The only way of explaining what things we can versus what things we can't do with property seems to be by appealing to which of them generates good consequence. In terms of the specific disagreements over whether or not people over the sort of difficult cases about whether or not things are threats to violence, I think that demonstrates why it's better for the ACLU to focus on things like immigration. Because right now, kids are being put in cages, and they were more so, and well, they were under the Trump administration. Seems like that is a more important fight than these sort of edge cases without clear benefit about whether or not something is a minuscule violation of free speech. It seems like there are sort of reasonable positions to be had about whether or not certain things are threats. And it's not like there's any risk if the ACLU did a little bit of extra activism about immigration. There's no risk of the First Amendment being abolished entirely. It's just a question of where the marginal resources go farthest. Finally, there was the point brought up about nonpartisanship, but the point is that the free speech edge cases are not nonpartisan. So generally, left-wing people are more in favor of speech restrictions, though I mean there are some exceptions. Often right-wing people think that left-wingers should be. So like a lot of right-wingers think that you shouldn't be allowed to burn the flag. But free speech is not a nonpartisan issue, and I think that the ACLU would be more successful as an entirely nonpartisan issue, given that their funding and effectiveness went up when they became more partisan.
I don't see why you went ahead and said that. Like, how is free speech not a nonpartisan issue? Because like left wingers and right wingers have to worry about the same amount of like pushback. Sure, like once again, comes with like internet things, but like leftists get restricted online as much as right wingers do. It's just right wingers tend to be more in the public eye, so they're able to go ahead and talk about it further. But like left wing people get consistently taken off of Twitter and all these other things. So it's not like free speech is something that is strictly an issue for right wing groups. If we wanted to go ahead and have like a group of communists go ahead and like have a rally in the States, I'm not sure how easy that would be for them to go ahead and do that. So I think it's just one group tends to be more loud about their transgressions over the others.
Well, okay, two things. One, Twitter taking people off their platform is not a violation of the because it's not done by the government. Second is that I think that regardless of whether it should be a partisan issue, I mean, I agree that all people should be more in favor of free speech. But descriptively, I think it is a partisan issue about where exactly free speech, the line for free speech falls. And so, for instance, liberals would be more likely to interpret something being a threat a little bit more liberally, pun intended, and conservatives would generally interpret it more narrowly. I think that there are just everything that is done involving legal suits about the First Amendment, or not everything, but most of it will be in some way partisan.
Wait, I totally disagree here. You could get liberals who would probably say that the Nazi march, the Nazi march. That you could probably get a lot of liberals say that's wrong. But on the other side, you could find another ACLU case like what's his name, Churchill Ward, who is a Native Americans professor, who wrote a book that said America deserved 9/11 and that it was like the chickens coming home to roost. And then the government tried to get him to stop publishing that book. You could get a lot of liberals to say that that's okay. It's partisan in context to different issues. Free speech is a very complicated issue. I'm much more partisan on free speech restrictions when it comes to child pornography, and much less when it comes to pornography consisting of consenting adults.
Let's go to Fanatic, Kobe, counter Shadow Sprout.
I think it's really important that like there's this thing that happens where we like forget our history and we tend to look at things like when we have an advantage as okay, even though like we probably disagree with the merit of the thing, right? And I think in this case that's what's happening because I think any leftist that would ever argue for the idea, I can say any leftist, but I would say there's a huge amount of leftists who would probably be arguing that the ACLU shouldn't defend Nazism, right? But there was a point in time during the Red Scare when they first came into power and like in the 50s during the McCarthy era where like a large portion of their platform was specifically fighting against fighting against or fighting for the ability of people to be vocal about like their positions like as Nazis or whatever. I'm sorry before the McCarthy era where they were like arguing for that. And I look at like now, right? Like there's so many people here that would like point blank say, yes, I'm communist, right? Like and there would be no like legal ramification for that. The ACLU is why you have that ability because the ACLU defended people's ability to do that at a point in time. Like that level of free speech is something that we can take for granted, but we shouldn't because we recognize, like as it stands now, if your position is something that is demonized or something that's in the minority, it'd be very easy to stamp that thing out if we didn't have our freedom of speech. So people like AOC wouldn't even be able to espouse plenty of reviews in like because it would literally be illegal because it is hyper minority, right? Same thing with, like I said, pretty much most socialists, most communists, and so on and so forth. The books that have like one of the largest book disseminated in college right now happens to be Karl Marx's economic book. Is Karl Marx's a Communist Manifesto. It is literally the single most popular book. That's only possible right now because of things that have happened by the ACLU. And it's literally how like so many leftists are coming into our politisphere and how the Overton window is shifting in the way that it has. So like, I think the idea of like, oh, I don't like Nazis, so I don't want them to speak. It's just stupid if you recognize that there is going to come a point in time where people don't like there has been points in time where people don't like some of the things that you believe in, right? There was a point in time when the idea of integration, that was like the minority position. And we had to fight for that. That would have been something that would have been fought against. And I'd have been demonized for saying it, right? So like just because you don't like something doesn't mean that it shouldn't have the ability to speak. Again, there are already limitations that are like really, really easily legally defined. The Supreme Court has like obviously made it so that you can't just say things that are like intentionally trying to be harmful. You can't like literally you can't do calls to violence. You can't threaten someone verbally. Like you can't like yell fire in a movie theater. Like there's so many specific cases of things that you can't do that are like pretty well defined, and we should depend on the Supreme Court to continue to redefine these things to make sure that actual threats aren't happening. But like the idea of like that people in the minority or people saying nefarious things shouldn't be able to do it. It's just completely wrong.
So okay, I'm going to respond to this. And Maddie, you got your hand up. Good, I'm going to put you in the list. But to be clear, the argument was not about whether not defending speech that people find not tasteful, right, or that weren't in the majority. That wasn't what I said. Maybe someone else said that, but not what I said. That was about stopping specifically hate speech, right? Hate speech is something very specific, right? So, this talking about like whether defending speech in the minority, well, hate speech at some point was in the majority, right? Like what we consider hate speech. But you would say, well, we should defend that as well. I say that hate speech is a threat. It's not defined as a threat under current law. It's certainly not, but it is a special category of speech that inherently carries a threat. It's simply we just decide not to recognize that in particular. But it's not that I think certain unpopular opinions shouldn't be defended, or that some First Amendment rights, like the First Amendment doesn't have its place. Absolutely. It's just that in this specific category should be banned. Okay.
Okay, I'm so happy you actually said that.
Kobe, it's your turn anyways, right? Just come on. Kobe, Counter, Shadow, Sprout, Maddie.
I'm sorry, this is a topic that I think is very interesting and engaging. And I'm excited because that point you just made talking about hate speech. Actually, I have a quote here from the ACLU. So I'll link in the chat. This is a section from like it looks like some sort of law review, but it's talking about the specific Nazi rally case. And this is so speaking about the idea of fighting words. This is the ACLU's argument for why they defend Nazi fighting words. I think that's a pretty good argument, and I'll relate it to a recent event. The ACLU says the ACLU claimed that such a doctrine could be extended easily to African Americans marching in hostile white communities or to other unpopular ideas who choose to assemble in areas where there are deeply antagonistic listeners. Thus, it should be argued that Black Power symbols, such as the clenched fist, could have been prohibited in Selma if when these communities were racially tense. On January, then it just goes on to talk about how they argue that like the Nazis should be able to wear their armbands. So that's the argument. It's like thinking about the march that the Not Fucking Around coalition did did that Confederate monument, right? You would absolutely, this would be banned instantaneously if we were to have, this example, if we were to ban the Nazi march, if that was the precedent that you can't have a march about a contentious political issue if you're in a community that is like an antagonistic, that would be like immediately banned because they have guns, they're walking in the streets, they have things Black Power, and they're in a white community that is, I mean, like that's just the way that the law works, right? Going forward, I don't like this idea that people have been saying that like so two things. First thing, Omni, I agree that we should spend more time both reforming immigration and fixing, and having lawyers to argue for migrants in general. But I think that the ACLUs can do both at the same time, right? They have a ton, like I was saying earlier, they have historically high rates of funding. If anything, it looks like a majority of the funding actually is going into immigration rights. So that's, I think, a separate conversation. The idea that these free speech issues are minority violations, I disagree. I put it in chat. I'll put it in chat again in a second. One of the biggest groups that is both currently and historically has had free speech violations used against them are Native Americans. In the 1970s, an ex-CIA agent wanted to write a book about a Native American activist who killed a police officer, or was alleged to kill a police officer, was accused and put in jail. That is like most people think, it's like it's pretty obviously a setup. He tried to publish this book, and the FBI stopped him for 10 years because they were arguing that it was like it contained information that was solicitous against the state or whatever, right? Many times minority issues are against the groups that we don't want to be targeted, right? Speaking of, like, say, the Westboro Baptist Church, a law passed against the Westboro Baptist Church is 100% going to give much more ammunition and much more oversight to groups, or to the FBI or the NCIS. What is it called? The whatever Snowden worked for, when they want to go look at, say, a mosque that is saying anti-American rhetoric. A mosque should be able to say anti-American rhetoric. A Muslim group that wants to say anti-American rhetoric should be able to gather in a community that's against that. I understand the discussion of hate speech, but I think that we have to separate discussion of how do we integrate hate speech as a concept into our law with the ACLU's job of defending the law as it stands. They defend it as it stands and how it's going to be used, and how we integrate hate speech into our law is a separate conversation, but an equally as important one.
Yeah, so let's move this along to make sure everyone can talk, right? So no long soliloquies. Counter, Shadows, Sprout, Maddie, Katarana, Omni. Counter, please.
Oh yeah, known for being brief. So when you were talking earlier, I had two words like popping in my head the whole time, and it was stochastic terrorism. That was the words that was popping into my head the entire time, where you lead people up to a conclusion and you never say that conclusion. Mm-hmm. So, the Jews have taken over the world. They're putting microchips in your kids, lasers, all that kind of stuff. They eat kids, they're pedophiles, this, that, the other. But I'm not saying do anything, mm-hmm. right? Like, I'm not saying do anything. And I could come up with another half dozen examples. But basically, like, I think the way that and Kobe actually just brought this up, which makes me deeply uncomfortable, when he was like, mosques should be able to do anti-American rhetoric. It's like, holy shit. Like, do I really believe that? Do I really believe that I should let fucking extremist imams like talk about, like, literally do the stochastic thing where they like go right up to the edge and then back off at the last second? And I think that at least the solution that I'm playing with in my head right now is
have to be sorry.
Yeah. Can we like, educate the population or hold these people accountable if stochastic rhetoric results in violence, or can we educate the population significantly that they are such that they recognize stochastic terrorism? And those are questions, not statements. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, fair enough. Interesting. Shadows, Sprout, Maddie, Katarana, Omni.
Okay, so I wanted to respond mainly to Prime and Omni. So Omni asked, like, how do the idea of natural rights, how do they line up perfectly with the idea of maximizing heuristics? I don't think they would line up perfectly, but I'm not too big on heuristics. I don't understand it well, but I understand what they mainly line up with is the ideologies mainly of liberalism and modernity, and the idea that there are rights that are inherent to humans, which is my second point. The criteria for what is a right is something that can be guaranteed without a government. So this is the idea of right versus entitlement. So a lot of people say, Americans should have a right to healthcare. They should have the right to access clean drinking water. They should have, the right to access the internet. I agree. These should be things that the government 100,000,000% should guarantee to the people. However, these are entitlements. Rights are something that you still have access to absent a government. Things like freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to self-defense, things like that. So that is what is a right. If you don't have a government, if you have a vacuum, you would still have access to these things. That being said, entitlements are very important. But Prem, I really, really, really need to respond to this point, because as someone who lives relatively close to Skokie, to someone who has visited the Holocaust Museum in Skokie several times throughout my life, to someone who even knows people from Skokie. Like, literally, I had a teacher in middle school who was arguing with their parents who were Holocaust survivors about the march. Their parents were defending the right. They said, this is America. They have free speech. They have the right to march through our community. She said, absolutely not. This is disgusting. So even like among people in Skokie, which, by the way, per capita, it was the area where a lot of Holocaust survivors moved to in Illinois. There were disagreements among those survivors whether or not they should have the right to do it. I think Kobe's point about Skokie and comparing it to Selma is a good example, though. I think another good example would be like the BPP marching in California. When Reagan was governor, and putting out these restrictions because it's very scary. It is scary to see nationalists of any type marching with that, but they have the right to do it, and we all acknowledge it. Also, the idea that hate speech carries a threat, I think it's true, but I think it's very different whether something is threatening or hateful. Like a good example would be, let's do AFPAC versus CPAC. Nick Fuentes could get up at AFPAC and say, man, I hate these, insert slur for Mexicans with their stupid sombreros and their disgusting food. This is why we need a white ethnic state. God, they're so disgusting. I want to kick them out of this country so bad. Versus someone at CPAC who gets up and says, we should really do something about this illegal immigration problem. People who have been here for a while and should get their citizenship, but there's just too many illegal immigrants. We really got to do something about it. The first one, where Nick Fuentes probably calls Mexicans wetbacks, is obviously way more hateful. But guess what? The second one is more threatening because it's like, we should really do something about these people and these illegal immigrants. It's not as hateful, but it definitely sounds more threatening. Like, let's be real here. Just because something is hate speech doesn't mean it carries a threat.
Avoid you using any slurs, even examples, please.
Okay, sorry, but I mean, do you disagree with that?
Sorry, I got blinded by the slur, so I couldn't even hear what you said.
I'm sorry. I know your Twitch account flashed before your eyes, but the idea that using slurs about Mexicans, saying how much you hate them and their mariachi music and their hats is much more hateful, but sounds less threatening than someone at CPAC saying we really got to do something about this illegal immigration and these illegal immigrants in our country.
That's what a dog whistle is, yeah.
Right, but one is obviously way more hateful, but is not as threatening as saying we need to do something about these people. Just because something is hateful doesn't make it threatening on its face.
Yeah, dog whistle. Agreed. Dog whistle. I understand.
Could Can I ask you a question? What do you think, Prime, it'd be able to craft legislation that'd be able to stop racist dog whistles that couldn't also be used against, say, something like, say, Eat the Rich or some other kind of like left-wing dog, like left-wing thing that somebody could say is a dog whistle? Or do you think that that's like an okay trade-off, that like stopping the ability of hate speech to be, or right-wing hate, or like a racist hate speech to be propagated is worth some edge cases if you would say that on the left?
I'd have to think about that.
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
It's a very good question. I'd probably go for the latter. It's like, if I can't say Eat the Rich, I'll be
exactly.
I'd be okay. Like, rather than like the tidal wave, the endless tsunami of hate that comes the way people of color to people of sexual the LGBT community, right? Like, I'd rather stop that, and like I'd find some other way to express my scorn for the ultra wealthy.
I think that's a definitely respectful position. Sorry for interrupting. I think that this is definitely like a incredibly nuanced topic.
No, I think so too. And I think you're all doing a very good job in trying to navigate it. All right, just try to continue on. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to jump in. So Sprout, Maddie, Katarana, Omni.
So I'm very confused. I'm extremely confused about what Shadows just said. He's talking about enforcing the law as a threat, as a racist threat, enforcing the law that illegal immigrants shouldn't be allowed to stay inside of the country that they're illegally in is threatening. That's okay. Yeah, enforcing laws is racist now. Okay, so but either way, I think from my point of view, I think that free speech should be given, no matter how hateful your speech is. And I honestly think that if we allow free speech and we allow everyone to speak openly, the racists are going to come out, they're going to show themselves. The homophobics, they're going to come out, they're going to show themselves. We can then turn around, we can bully them out of society. And we can do this. We can bully them out of society. If you're going to come out and be openly racist, then it's going to be a permanent mark on you, right? And so if you're going to be out and be extremely homophobic, it's going to be a permanent mark on you. We see this with public figures such as Nick Fuentes. And so I think that the more free speech we have, the more people will feel open to just come out and say what they actually mean, instead of just hidden racism. Instead of someone who's just who really thinks it and really believes it, but is never going to say it because it's against the law. I believe that if they can actually say it, we can bully them out of society, and it'd be a much better society for it.
All right.
Wait, can I respond to him?
Let Maddie give it a crack. If not, like, I would love to take that to the open panel.
But he talked to me directly.
I'm telling you right now, we don't have time. I'm trying to make sure everyone gets to talk. So Maddie, please.
Yeah. So I think there is an important distinction to be made between simply expressing something shitty versus expressing something shitty to explicitly threaten, intimidate, or cause harm. And this is actually something that the Supreme Court has ruled on in the past. So they ruled on this in 2003, Virginia v. Black. And that was a case concerning cross burning in public spaces. So the court upheld a statute in the state of Virginia, making it illegal to burn a cross in public when it's explicitly done to intimidate others. So that's where they make the distinction between, like, if someone's just expressing something shitty, they have the freedom to express bullshit, dumb, like, bigoted views. However, when that expression then crosses the line from just simply like, oh, well, I'm expressing something shitty versus I'm doing this with the explicit intent to cause harm or to threaten someone's safety or to intimidate and, cause someone to, like, fear for the safety of themselves or their families, that is where that speech is no longer protected. So I think that is sort of where I draw the line as well, in where I see like speech that is worthy or like should be protected and fought for versus if Nazis are going around like literally like saying this stuff that is explicitly intended to like intimidate and to put fear into the hearts of people because they're saying that you shouldn't exist or that like you should be whatever, like that is not okay. And that is not something where it's like, oh, it's just a free exchange of ideas. No, that is directly, that's then infringing on the civil rights of the people they are targeting. Let's not pretend that this is like a victimless thing. So yeah, again, and this is something that has been upheld in the Supreme Court, where they are still protecting the rights. So like, this is why, cross burnings just on their own, absent of intent, because you do have the onus of having to prove that it's meant to intimidate. Like, that alone is not illegal and is protected as just an expression of ideology. However, if it can be proven that that cross burning was done in order to intimidate, then it is no longer protected by freedom of speech. And that is something that, again, the Supreme Court has upheld time and time again, and most significantly in Virginia versus Black in 2003.
Guys, oh, sorry.
Let's move along. So yeah, I can put you on the list. And then put Shadows on the list too. So Kobe, right, and then so let's go to Carolina, Omni, and then Kobe.
Yeah, so on this particular thing, I understand that hate speech isn't particularly great to get or receive, but I would say that until there is some type of change in legislation in which we go ahead and actually ban hate speech, then I think it is in everyone's best interest, as long as it's open to anybody to do, that it's still something that we have to protect, because hate speech is something that both sides are able to go ahead and do. So just like, I'm not saying that hate speech from the left is particularly intimidating. I don't find Black separatists to be very intimidating, because, like, what are they going to do? Okay, good luck with that. But it still means that, like, if we are going to go ahead and protect hate speech, then we need to just protect it for both sides. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not particularly threatened from somebody on the left using hate speech, it's still something that is protected. And it's all just about who ends up holding power. Hate speech from one end is more intimidating because they actually hold institutional power. But at the end of the day, that's not incorporated when we're talking about these things. What we're talking about is what your pure rights are. And one side shouldn't have more rights than the other just based off of what the power dynamics are. So, yeah, I think as long as hate speech is somewhat covered, like, as long as hate speech is something that hasn't been ruled out by the federal government or the Supreme Court to say that, hey, hate speech cannot be covered under your First Amendment, then we need to cover it for everybody.
Omni, Kobe, Shadows.
Yeah, so we've obviously gotten way off the original point. ACLU. I think regardless of the broader question of whether or not we should curtail free speech rights, in terms of the question of whether or not the marginal resources of the ACLU are better spent protecting the rights of immigrants or protecting these marginal cases involving free speech rights, I mean, there hasn't been an argument in the last half hour as to why it's better to focus on free speech, given that right now the battle over free speech is not should people have the right to say.
Was the question not that no matter what, they are going to be protecting free speech cases? So the whole question, the reason why nobody's engaging with that, because it's not a real caveat. It's going to be protected no matter what. Now it's a matter of, is it for the left or is it for everybody? That's why no one's engaging with it.
No one is saying anything about focus. We don't at all. I think the opposite was actually said.
I mean, the original topic, the original topic was specifically about whether or not it was good that they were branching out in terms of not putting all their focus on speech, but also having it be about like issues such as immigration. In terms of the point about hate, I think that prohibiting hate speech would be a disaster. One big reason is there is no good definition of hate speech. I mean, like, Prime, can you give a definition of hate speech that you think would result in things going well?
Is Prime a lawyer? Why would his definition be particularly good? I mean, same thing goes for when we talk about threats. Like, that's why we have legal definitions, and it's not just Prime saying this is a threat. There's legal definitions. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Katarina said. I don't think any of us are going to appeal to anyone's proprietary definitions. I think she literally laid it out really perfectly there. I don't know why we're even trying to go down that rabbit hole. She kind of just, that was it. She should have dropped it right there. I've got a question. Since everybody's in here is in favor of freedom of speech, why aren't we praying legendary? Like,
Marlon,
what?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the problem is there is no good definition of speech, such that because the views that one side thinks are hateful, the other side does not think are hateful. For instance, you might have vegan activists that factory farmers should die. Some might say that that view is hateful, others might not. But the spillover effects of restricting hate speech are just so great, and the benefits are so small in comparison to the risk of silencing people's ability to state controversial views, that it seems like a disastrous policy, particularly given the fact that there is no good bright line. And so any standard that you set up will inevitably result in people's speech being restricted in ways that even the people who set up the law didn't think that it should be restricted, given that it's up to the interpretation of the court.
Okay. So we'll go to Kobe, Shadows, and then Fanatic wanted to say something at the end.
Yeah, for sure. I just had a question for the folks that are a little bit more interested in the idea that like hate speech in public, or hate speech should not be like allowed or whatever. This is like a violation of free speech, and that the Supreme Court has decided on it. What is the panel's idea or opinion on the Charlottesville rally? Should that have been allowed to happen, or should you think that like violated the idea that it was demonstrating to intimidate, or et cetera, et cetera?
The violence or the rally?
I mean,
yeah. Because also, like this at that rally, weren't they chanting "Jews will not replace us" or like "You will not replace us," implying that like people that are not white.
Jews,
it was Jews, and then they also chanted "Blood and Soil."
Yeah, so that's the exact point that I'm making, right? Is that this was allowed, so this is allowed under our current paradigm. Should we change our paradigm to make this not allowed?
The violence wasn't allowed.
Not me.
No, of course, the violence not. I'm talking about the march. I'm talking about the night march.
Okay.
The violence happened the day after. I'm talking about the march, which was sanctioned by the city. That's what I'm asking. So should we change the laws to make that not have been a thing that should have been allowed? So I'm asking.
Nope.
So
I think the law should stay the same.
I'm leaning towards.
That's really tough.
I'm leaning towards yes, but I could be convinced.
Exactly. It just if I could briefly give my take. Again, I don't. It's sick. These are sickening images. Okay, these are I'll agree with this. But again, I know how this government works. I know like one thing I didn't get a chance to bring up. I forgot. Right now, there's a Native Americans that are fighting for water rights in a state that I can't remember, and I should go look this up. 1,000,000,000 billion%. Any organization that says land back instantaneously is going to get on this, because that is, again, like how could you possibly argue that something like that is not is not pushing into this? I do not want that worries me. But also, as I said again, it's what is allowed under free speech is vile, and we need to figure out ways to curtail it. Absolutely, we need to figure out ways to curtail, as you put it, the tsunami of hate speech that we were seeing in the last 4 years.
Okay, Shadows and Fanatic.
Okay, so I was initially to respond to Spartacus, but I guess since Kobe made that point, I'll give my response. I think obviously, that protest, as gross as chanting "Blood and Soil" is, it should be allowed. I of course am on the side of the counter-protesters, and I agree with them. That is the free speech way to respond to discussing speech, is by having a counter protest to the protest. You are then exercising your free speech. Of course, there is an issue of the police and physical barriers not being enough to prevent violence. But to respond to what Spartacus is saying, like, wow, I didn't know enforcing the law was racist. Well, no, that's not what all I'm saying, dude. There's a huge difference in between saying we should do something about illegal immigration and we should really do something about these illegal immigrants. I want to do something about illegal immigration. I want to create a two-tiered system that doesn't cause people to want to, enter the country through a port of entry. I want a more porous border that will give all these adults on the southern border a chance to enter this country and, work for a better life. That is very different than saying, I want to do something about illegal immigration. That is so different than saying we should do something about these illegal immigrants, because the latter could possibly incite some sort of not vigilante justice, but someone acting outside of the legal system to do something about these people. So that is what is important. The second is far more insightful than the first saying, I want to change or, the legal system, or, oh, I want to enforce the legal system.
Okay. Let's go to Fanatic. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I think the ACLU, obviously they're a fantastic organization, and if we had them like at our own personal disposal, we'd be able to fix certain issues. And I think one of the issues that needs to be addressed right now is because I see it. I'm wondering, since freedom of speech is a thing, are we all in favor of freeing Legendary, considering he's not been able to return back to this amazing space to discuss his beautiful views? Is everyone here in favor of that?
Sure.
Yes, freedom of genetics conversation is super important, man.
I would say I not everybody needs to support free speech themselves.
Well, yes, perfect.
Yeah, so Prime controls his own platform, and he doesn't need to unanimously allow anything on it, I guess.
Oh, I thought we were talking about the Minecraft player. I had no idea who the fuck we're talking about.
Oh, you missed out some good stuff.
Carolina's opposed because he was disappointed in her.
Well, I mean, to answer the question,
you caught me. I'm still butthurt to this day.
Roby?
Yeah. To briefly answer the question, obviously it's not my decision who is on or off the panel, but I think that actually this is a good example of how I believe that one of the ways, I should say, we should deal with hateful speech. I think that Prime is Legendary is totally fine to go live on Insta or on a Twitch and do whatever he wants to do, say whatever he wants to say. That's totally fine. That's his opinion. People who want to watch him can watch him. They control his chat. He can ban people from the chat. But equally, I think Prime is completely right to say, hey, I have a platform of X amount of people. I don't want to talk about XYZ subject. Yeet him. If Prime wants to say, if you talk about groundhogs, I'm eating you. You can yeet if you talk about groundhogs. I think that's a way that we can deal with these hateful views.
It wasn't a question of rights. This was just a question of if people's views were consistent in the idea that we should probably platform people, even if we disagree with what they're saying, would they feel the same way regarding this? Not whether we can force Prime. It is his platform, and he's been incredibly inclusive, so he can decide who comes in, who doesn't.
So, I mean, if it just to give my personal subjective answer, if I had a platform, I wouldn't be against platforming specifically Prime as Legendary, but I would want to do it in a case where either I or somebody else was pushing back against his beliefs. That's basically it. But that's my own.
And to go off what Kobe just said, it's not that I have a problem specifically with the guy. It's that my platform exists on a foundation of sand, right? So as soon as the tide, known as Twitch TOS moderation, comes in, they can take it away. So I don't know. So it's problematic. Okay. So, Sprout, you got to respond in less than 2 seconds.
Okay, I'll do the best I can. So from what Shadows was saying, this is exactly why I'm for it being free speech. Shadows was taking something and then putting his own interpretation on it and then calling it hate speech. Someone saying we should do something about these illegal immigrants could obviously mean that we should enforce the law, but Shadows decided to put his own little interpretation on there to interpret that it was actually meaning to do vigilante justice, which is exactly why I'm for free speech, because hate speech can be interpreted to be many different things. It wasn't too long ago that I believe either in Mexico or Spain, they arrested someone for calling I think they called the cops slackers on Facebook, and he was arrested for that. And so it was actually a Spanish government. So they arrested someone for calling the cops slackers.
Are you talking about the rapper?
I don't know who it was. All I know is that I can look further into it if you'd like me to. But they arrested someone for calling cops slackers. That's why he was arrested. And so that was what looked like criticizing the government to Spain. And so speech is very interpretative to where you can hear something completely different than what was meant, which is very dangerous when we're talking about including what's in hate speech.
But it's not. Once it becomes the legal definition, it's not as much interpretative. So if someone themselves could say, I feel like this is hate speech, and then just easily they would go look at the definition and be like, no, this doesn't constitute as hate speech. And then that would be over with it. Just like the same way that you're able to say that something's a threat. You might go ahead and construe it as a threat, but if we go ahead and look at the definition and it doesn't actually meet the legal definition of being threatening speech, then that's it. It's done. So I don't know why there's this idea that
Oh.
like it's all up until like the mind of the beholder when it comes
Because
to
of
hate
Europe.
speech, and it wouldn't be on the books.
Because of all of Europe.
Because of how Europe is implanted this. I mean, I got my life threatened on Twitch, and I couldn't go tell the police because I didn't have his address. I couldn't get a protective order because I didn't have this person's address. So like it was insane to me that I couldn't get a protective order when my life was threatened. But that is what it is. I mean, the law can determine whatever is the threat, whatever's the threat. But I'm saying we're arguing about like they're not arguing about like, what is hate speech, right? We're arguing about whether or not it should be there. And Shadows was saying that would be hate speech. And I'm saying this is the danger. This is the danger you come into when you're trying to outlaw hate speech. Speech is very interpretive. You can decide that something is hate speech or isn't hate speech based off of why you interpret it.
Yeah, everything is interpretive when it comes to speech, and that's why once again, like you're able to go ahead and call some types of speech illegal, even though that is also an interpretive form of speech because all speech is interpretive. And like when you're going ahead and saying, "Oh, but Europe does it this way," I don't remember that being our standard when it comes to things.